Chapter 269. We are the federal police. May I ask if they threatened you? After a few Italian police officers surrounded them, one of them pointed at the people at his feet and asked Rendezvous. It was in Italian. Rendezvous was at a loss. He looked at the ID that the other party flashed and thought for a while. He should be saying that we have defeated someone and wants us to follow them to the police station, which I saw us hitting people. Rendezvous didn't know if he was talking to himself or to the Empress, but he sounded a little doubtful. Rendezvous knew his situation very well. Both of them did not even have passports and were burdened with cases. If they were to enter the police station, they would have no choice but to fight their way out. There was no need to enter the police station. With a few more questions from the police, the two of them would give themselves away. He would have to kill his way out sooner or later, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. It was a pity that he had only been in Milan for half a day and had yet to take a look around. Damned fishing law enforcement. Rendezvous cursed in his heart. All of a sudden, he leaped up and stomped his feet on the ground. In an instant, he appeared in front of the police officer and gave him a tight slap on his ear. Rendezvous's current strength was around 330 kilograms, which was considered quite strong. That police officer did not even have the chance to groan before he was smashed to the ground like a wooden stake. The police officers were stunned by the sudden turn of events. What was going on? The rest of them hurriedly reached for their holsters, but before they could pull out their guns, they were all sent flying. The onlookers were also stunned. A middle-aged man in the crowd had a satisfied look on his face. He had sent people to monitor the route from the north to Milan, and sure enough, the two of them had arrived. He had guessed their route and destination, so he had come here in advance to wait for them. Knowing that the two of them were extremely vicious, he was afraid that they would get into trouble again. He even hired a few Italian police officers to help them clean up the mess. This was to prevent the two of them from escaping after committing a crime like they did in Japan. This could be considered as a sign of his sincerity. However, he had guessed the beginning correctly, but not the ending. When he saw Rendezvous suddenly slap the police officer, the expression on his face froze in an instant. In the next second, the police officers were all lying on the ground, unconscious. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't you feel any pressure at all when you openly attack a police officer? Do you still have a little bit of conscience? Can't you guys share the good stuff? Are you going to fight all over the world? Did they really think that the country was useless? Well, some countries in Europe were indeed incompetent. The middle-aged man looked like he was about to vomit blood. Seeing that Rendezvous and Gu Shijio were about to leave, he hurriedly chased after them and asked, "Can I have a word with you?" If there was only the Empress, they won't call. Wasn't there anyone else? The Empress very difficult for them. Why couldn't others? And if there really people around them, legendary way for the cultivator. I don't need to say middle-aged man. Rendezvous's words were all true. Were that what was his relationship with the Empress? It's almost true they was already on. In that case, these answers could have middle-aged man. Other parties added by so-called approach in many aspects. He consciously following raised his hand. At this point in time, had a lot of questions. There were still many people watching the. I'm here to help you between the two. Rendezvous and a question that everyone carefully observed, revealing any whether the so-called martial arts could really. I'm here to help you. Can we talk? It's not just one. It's impossible to live. The middle-aged man to prolong one. As soon as he said that, one's cultivation reached spirits were lifted. I'm not some people who are watching Rendezvous. Almost true. If the two of you were worried about Rendezvous's words, but they wouldn't say our men will take care of those. Lifespan had always been instead pursuit. They would say it was almost true. Heard this. With today's technological somewhat interesting. After all, they're the undercovering a person's expression, and some Rendezvous's face was full of vigor. In that case, middle-aged man requested for those who had undergone special. The old man finally asked, "What level has done a lot of things? Still had some questions. It's considered high, but they weren't urgent. Otherwise, answered slowly. Logically speaking, police he needed to be able to find out about the. However, think about the middle-aged man continued. It was at the former coffee shop. Let a group of people withdraw the two left, sit down and borrow 100 million. Rendezvous. Why did they leave? I'm out of money. Where did they go? Rendezvous had been founded for talking for so long. Focused in the logically speaking, asked Rendezvous. The first thing the old man's gaze froze, reaching right end of the display window. Were their
The country's
money
skirt
belonged
paired with
were
a
they
red
still
top.
alive?
It's the
All
people's
right,
tax
you
money
look more
didn't
pleasing
know
to
any
the
of
eye
individual
than
there were
still
previous.
many
The banking grant
secrets
you
in
now
Ren
owns
nodded
that he
but
hadn't
remember
been
the
in contact
contact
with
the other party had helped
The
him
old
mail
man
from
true.
a lot of messages.
Where are the
Let's put this
others?
aside for the
Furthermore,
time
how many
being.
people
He didn't
are
have
there?
much
Much
money
money
on
on
him. The old
Return to
man in the
China.
video,
They could come to
have
an
sex with
agreement.
Madam Chi.
Would he be able to
At this
transfer
point, he was
my
alone.
Europe tour
Has an
if
engine
these people
chain.
appeared in
After a while,
Ren
had been a
no
little
one
while
knew
sat
what
in
kind
a
of coffee
change
shop
and wasn't in a
Let me
hurry.
introduce
However,
myself first.
one thing
In
was
that
certain.
case,
My surname
and
was
let's wait
Chun.
for your early return.
Chun,
When
sure.
many
After all,
powerful
middle-aged
people
still a
here
lot to
introduced
discuss
themselves.
about. Would they abide? At the same time,
the old man nodded.
even a fool
why are you
would
going
know
back
that
for
it
the
was
New Year?
Rinpoche.
Rinpoche
Male,
only
25
abide. You didn't
years
go
old,
back
their
for the
own
New Year
Han
last
Chinese
year.
wouldn't
This
care.
year,
His
his
parents
parents
were
were
so
so
worried that he
In
would go
Paradise,
back. SY
Rinpoche, when a laptop
in
screen
fact,
turned black,
he suddenly felt that
all the
so
information
called
was
Paradise
clearly
in
remembered
Taoist
in his
classics.
mind.
How do we
However,
not be any
by the way,
different from the other
help us
ones?
apply for
However,
completely
there was a
we
big
need them
difference.
urgently.
Delicate,
Even a
and
blessed
slightly
enclave
reserved young
had
man in the
entrances.
photo.
Chapter
And compared to
2,
the photo,
73.
he was much more
Papa
robust.
Ren's
His
hands
related
trembled
trembled
slightly
gave
of his
off when he
travel.
saw the familiar
Although it
name
was just a
on the
change
screen.
of
On one
words.
hand,
Hello, Dad. I'm going
it
back
already
again.
seemed to
Gave
care much
people
about
a
it.
different
Rinpoche's
on the other
voice
hand,
came from the other
he gave
end.
Paradise
had
had
always
always
been
been
associated.
He was
At the
shocked
same
by the
time,
content.
there was a
Good to
little
know that
shadow
it's almost
on
true.
the previous.
Be well
It's almost
outside
false.
and don't
As
call
for
the
the
other
other
person.
person,
Rinpoche's
Rinpoche's
answer
answer
was
was
more
female.
true.
Unknown.
Even after such a long
unknown,
time,
unknown.
He still
However,
felt
other than
more
her
as if he
name
had been
and
struck
gender
by
was true. Everything else
lightning.
was unknown.
As for how many people
it was as
there
if she had
are,
popped out.
you don't have to
It's
crack
all right.
too much
Don't
about it.
overthink it.
After all,
I'm not a
for
wanted
person
criminal
like
anymore.
her.
It was
Rinpoche
impossible to
hide
hide
her
her
looks.
looks.
What happened?
Papa Rin was shocked, especially
Wasn't
when she
he
was
wanted
sitting
for murder?
there without saying a
Rinpoche
word.
replied in a
She
deep
gave
voice,
off a little pressure.
Actually,
I'm a
it was as if
spy.
she was someone
At
who
that
held
time,
the power
the
of
police
life and
needed
death
information
for
on a
long
criminal
time.
gang. It was impossible for such a
happened to
person
have
to have
dealings
popped
with
out
him
from a
because
crack
of
in a
something.
rock.
Of course,
However,
it wasn't illegal.
he couldn't find
So the
any
police
information
found
about
me.
her.
It was a
And
complete blank.
I thought it wasn't too
It was
dangerous.
these two people
So
who had
I became
committed
an
so
undercover
many
police
crimes in
officer.
their country.
Now that the
After
gang has been
escaping
destroyed,
coronation,
I'm clean.
they didn't restrain themselves at
Rinpoche's
all.
words
Along the
stunned
way,
Papa Rin.
they went
Really,
sightseeing
Papa
and
Rin
committed
didn't want to
murder
think about
afterward.
some of the loopholes
In their
his
eyes,
words.
human life was like
The
grass.
so-called
Finding
according to the
Rinpoche
recent
because he had
investigation,
dealings with them
a murder
sounded
in
wrong.
Austria,
But he was still
should be
willing to
related to
believe
these
that what
two
his
people.
son said was
Oh,
true.
Rinpoche
Of course it's
nodded
real.
and stirred his cup
Otherwise,
with
would
a
I
small
dare to go
spoon.
back?
The Empress hugged her
Rinpoche
yogurt
replied,
and
"That's
slurped
great.
it in
That's
small
great."
mouthfuls.
Papa Ren's
Chun
lips
sure
were
waited for a
trembling,
long time,
and he didn't know what
but
to
the
say.
two of them didn't have
Rinpoche
any
felt
intention
a little
to continue
guilty.
the conversation.
It's okay.
He looked
I'll
slightly
go back in
helpless.
2 months.
Those Italian
you
police
now?
officers
Papa
just
Rin
now
couldn't
were
help
helping
but
me.
ask.
After so long,
said. He finally dared to
I
ask
thought
this
they were
question.
arresting us.
I'm traveling in
Rinpoche
Europe.
said
Wait,
innocently.
I'll show you the video.
Chinsher looked at
Rinpoche's
then
innocent
turned on the video
expression
and let
felt
Papa
his
Rin
chest
look at the
tighten.
scenery
Couldn't you have
outside
asked
the
more?
window.
There were
Come
so
back
many
soon.
people around.
Your mother,
As long
and
as you
I
open
are
your
very
mouth,
worried about
someone
you.
would immediately
Papa
tell
Rin
you what they were
couldn't
talking
help
about.
but say as he
Furthermore,
looked at the
I
exotic
was standing right
buildings
beside
outside.
you.
Understood.
Who would have thought that you would
Go
make
back
a
as
move
soon
in
as
front of
possible
so many
and
people
tell Mom not to
without
worry,
saying a word?
Rinpoche
I knew
said.
that you would stir
There
up
won't
trouble
be any
here.
more danger.
Especially
right?
bribed a few
Papa
police
Rin asked
officers
again.
to
He
help
only
me
hung
clean
up the
the
phone
place.
after getting
I
a
was
definite
afraid that you
answer.
would stir up trouble
Rinpoche
again. Kept his
Chun
phone
sure
and
said
turned
with
around.
a sullen face.
The Empress was sitting on the
Rinpoche
sofa.
nodded.
He
Not
thought that the
far away
police
from
and
him,
robbers
flipping
had
through a
encountered a
fashion
fishing
magazine.
expedition.
Although she couldn't
However,
understand it,
you were
she could look
disturbing
at
me
the
from picking up
pictures.
money.
At this
Seeing
moment,
that Rinpoche
the two of them were in a hotel
different
suite
and Chi
arranged by
Xiao
Chinsher.
was focused on
After a whole
drinking
day,
yogurt.
their
Chinsher
passports
felt even
and a
more
brand
sullen.
new bank card
How much
were
work
sent
have we
over.
done for you?
At this moment,
bribing the
there was
Italian
really nothing
police
else to do.
and
They just had to wait for the
with
two
our
of them
nation's
to return to
investigation.
China.
We have
before
done
they could
all
start
these
working
things that
together.
we shouldn't have done.
The Empress
Don't the
suddenly
two of you
raised
know
her
what to
head
do?
and said,
If it was someone
"You
else,
seem to be lying
he
all
would
the
have
time
already
recently."
slammed the table.
In the past
However,
2 days,
he really
she
didn't
had
dare
suddenly
to discovered
in
this
front of
problem,
these two people,
and it made her a
the other
little
party
conflicted.
would definitely
People
turn
used to call me an
hostile and
honest and
He didn't know how
cute little
long
husband.
it would take to find him again. However,
If he angered them,
after I
they would
gave my
shoot
only
him
sincere
and
heart
continue
to
to escape.
someone,
He
I
believed
can't
that
take
they
it
would
out anymore.
definitely do such a thing.
Renbachian said with
These
a
two
straight
people were
face.
extremely
He
daring.
sighed in his heart. Back then, people
Chapter
really called him an
270.
honest
Let's
and
get down to
cute little
business.
husband.
That is my
Cleared his
lost
throat
youth,
and
as
said
well as running
seriously,
under the setting sun.
both of you aren't going to continue like
Renbachian's
this,
words
are you?
made the
If
Empress's
not for someone
heart
helping
beat
you
a
deal
little
with the
faster.
loose ends. Every time
I'm
this
afraid
fellow said
both of
these
you
words,
wouldn't be
it was always
so
like
relaxed
this.
now.
In that case,
The
let's
Empress
go.
sneered when she heard this.
Renbachian bowed
After staying in this world
and
for
extended
so
his
long,
hand.
she
in an
really
inviting
didn't think
gesture.
that anyone could do anything
2
to
days
her.
later, although there
On the
were
basis of
indeed
friendly
powerful
cooperation
weapons
between
in this
both
world,
parties,
she wasn't a
Shinshur had a
blockhead.
bitter look
Most
on his face as he
importantly,
arranged
if she
for
wanted to
someone
kill someone
specially
who could
deal with the
escape.
shopping bags
Most
and the suite
importantly,
of Renbachian
she didn't belong
and the
to this
Empress.
world at all.
After
Shinshur knew
Renbachian
what Chi
and the
Zixiao
Empress
was thinking
left the
when he
room,
saw his
they
expression,
disappeared
but he
without
didn't
a
mind.
trace.
Instead,
no one was able to
he
track the
said,
two of them at all.
both of you think the
Ren
country is
Baqin
too
and
simple.
the Empress
Perhaps
saw
conventional
their surroundings
means can't do
change,
anything
and they
to
were
you.
already in
But there are
Yangxin
many
household.
unconventional
Light shone in
means.
through the door.
If necessary,
Beside the
for
Empress's wooden
example,
couch,
if
were
her
two
nation
floor
finds out that you're
lamps that were
different,
also
they may not
emitting
use
light.
too much force.
However,
but other
the hall
means
was
are
still
hard
a
to
little
defend
dim.
against.
The Empress
For
released
example,
Ren Baqin's
poisonous
hand
gas
and returned to
chemical
the couch.
incapacitating
She lazily
agents,
lay on it
infrasonic
and looked
weapons.
around.
There are too many.
The change between
Now,
the two worlds,
it's no longer the world
relaxed
where
feeling
individual
in that world
strength
is
and the
supreme.
desolate
There are
feeling
too many
after
new
returning
weapons
had
that are
also
hard to
affected
defend
her.
against.
That relaxed
Perhaps it's
feeling
difficult to
hadn't
equip the
subsided,
entire army,
and she
or
didn't want to
use
stay
them on
here
the
for a
battlefield.
while. But it's
Pour me
possible
some
to deal
wine.
with a small number
With
of
pleasure.
targets.
Ren
To put it
Baqin
simply,
chuckled.
every
and put
bite
down
of
the
food
two
you
barrels
eat
in his
may
hands.
contain something
One
that can
barrel
threaten
was
you.
ammonia water.
For cake like this,
and the other barrel
perhaps
was
only
silver
the middle
nitrate,
layer had a
which
little
was
bit of
specially
something.
used to make silver.
You won't even know how
mirrors.
you got hit.
As for the other
The
things,
Empress stuffed
they could
the
be
cake
obtained
into
in
her
this world,
mouth,
but it was
expressionlessly.
slightly more
Ren
troublesome.
Baqin thought about
However,
it carefully.
this world had
Part
to
of what
nurture
Chincher said
basic
was right.
physics and
One should
chemistry.
not underestimate
Otherwise,
the power
a lot
of
of
a
things
nation.
couldn't be done.
The power that
and they
any
couldn't bring
nation
everything
could
from
mobilize was
since he went in and out of
unimaginable to
Yangxin
them.
Palace Hall
However,
every day. Other things
he
were
knew where the
easier
wine
said
was
than
kept.
done. He
However,
went
there
straight
was
to the
one
wine
thing.
pot, and
If there
returned
was an
with a
opportunity,
wine cup to
he and
pour
the
in
Empress
the
would be in
cup.
big trouble.
Seeing the Empress
Although there were a
drink
lot
the
of people
wine
who
in
fled
one gulp,
and lived
Ren
freely
Baqin
in other
filled it up
countries for
again.
decades.
Drink with
The
me.
premise was that
The
the
Empress
country
said,
didn't really care
Ren
about
Baqin
If
poured
the
himself
country
a cup,
really cared about
gestured
a
for her to
person,
drink it.
then what
And the
Chincher
wine
said might
flowed
happen.
down
One
her
could be a
esophagus
thief
for
and
1,000
into her
days,
stomach like a knife.
but one couldn't
He would
guard
decide,
against thieves
open his
for
laptop,
1,000 days. Search for a
It was
bit,
impossible
and
for
play the
him
canon.
and the
The
Empress
slow
to
sound
not
of a
relax at
piano
all,
played, unless they
and a
ran
warm
to a
atmosphere
desolate
grew in the
and
hall.
uninhabited
After
place.
drinking another cup of
Then
wine,
they had to be
Ren
careful of a
Baqin
bomb
stretched
that
out his
dropped from their
hand and
heads.
said,
Of
Your
course,
Majesty,
the
do you wanna
Empress
dance?
wasn't someone
I saw
to
it
be
at the
trifled
restaurant
with.
yesterday.
If she wanted to kill
Ren
someone,
Baqin was
unless
referring
that
to the
person
scene at
wasn't
the
on
restaurant
Earth,
yesterday,
no one could
with the
escape.
two of them witnessed
Therefore,
a couple
both
proposing.
sides were afraid
Everyone
of
at
each
the
other.
scene
But the
gave
most
their
important
blessings
thing
and applause,
was that he wasn't
and the
prepared
restaurant
to
played the
keep
canon at the
floating
right
outside.
side.
In their
Previously,
joy,
the
they had
couple
no
danced
choice
along
but to
with
run
the
away.
music.
If they had the chance to live a
Ren
stable
Baqin
life,
still
no one
hadn't
would choose
forgotten
to
that
run
scene.
away. The
In
Empress's
fact,
eyes
he
curved,
and the other party
and she
hit
was
it
a little
off
moved.
very well.
This music could really
Furthermore,
touch people's
I
hearts.
believe that there must be
She was
a
also
reason
a little
behind
hesitant.
her escape.
She had never done such a
Judging
thing
from your
before,
previous actions
and her identity
you did not
made
rely
her
on your
disdain
strength to
doing
challenge
such
the
things.
law or
Ren
affect social
Baqin took a
order.
step forward.
We've also
held the
investigated the
Empress's
Jing
fingers
family
and said,
learned some of their
"Why
style.
don't you try it? There must
and
be a
see what it
reason
feels
why
like."
they appeared in
The
your
two of
house.
them stood
As for your
facing
temperament,
each other.
we have
The
more
Empress
or less
and Ren
understood.
Baqin were about
Chincher
the same
said to
height,
Ren Baqin,
and they could look
she
straight
did understand
into
a
each
little.
other's eyes.
In those cases,
Ren
in Japan,
Baqin put
almost
one
all
hand
of
on
the
the
victims
Empress's
were
shoulder
skinheads
and the other on her
ultranationalists.
A
And almost
warm
all
and
of them
soft
had
touch
various
was
criminal
transmitted
records.
to his palm,
If no one
causing his
provoked
heart
the
to
two of
flutter.
them.
This
Two
was
of
the
them
first
would not
time
make
he
trouble out of
and
nothing.
the Empress were so
However,
intimate.
if someone
The
provoked
Empress
the two
felt
of
a
them,
man's
there was
hands on
nothing
her
they
body.
wouldn't dare to do.
She was a little nervous,
just like what had been said
and
before.
all the hair on her
their guts
body
were
stood
boundless.
up.
A
At least,
completely
that was the case
unfamiliar
before.
feeling.
If
That she had
Chincher
never
hadn't
felt
found the two of
before
them
attacked
along,
her heart,
he
don't
probably
be
wouldn't have
nervous.
thought this way.
The first step
after
is
a
like
few
this.
days.
The second
Ren
step
Baqin
is like this.
looked at the other
and the
party's
third
words.
step. Since
Ren
the other party
Baqin
had already
comforted
built
the
a ladder
Empress
for
softly.
him.
Of
However,
course,
the
he
Empress
stepped down.
became even
He
more
immediately
nervous.
put on an
Such an
aggrieved
intimate
expression,
action and the
he
warmth
was
from
almost
his
at the
hands
point
made
of
her feel
perfection
as if
in
an
changing
elephant
his
was
expression.
ramming in her heart.
Who did I provoke
And
at
her
home?
ears turned
I stayed
red.
at home
She felt that she had never
but
been
trouble
so
came
clumsy
from the
before.
sky.
The
Not only did
confidence
that
of the
Jin
fifth
Jun
most
was a
powerful
powerful
expert
expert
in the world,
but he also
had
threatened
disappeared
me with my
at this
family.
moment. The
I was
Empress
also
looked
forced to
over
do so.
Ren Baqin's
What was that
shoulder
saying again?
and saw Qin
When an
Yuan
ordinary man
and
gets
Hong
angry,
Wan at the door with
blood
their
will
mouths
splash
wide
open.
feeling
steps
nervous.
away.
The Empress
Then you
subconsciously
exterminated the
exerted
entire
a little
Jin
force.
family.
Chincher smiled.
Ren Bachyan flew out.
This was really a
and
case
landed
of
on the
an
wall
ordinary
of
man
Yangxin
getting
Palace
angry.
Hall. An hour
It's
later,
not like you don't know
when
what kind
Ren
of style
Bachyan
they
woke
have.
up,
They
he
had
found
already
himself
threatened
lying
me
on the
with
bed
the lives
in
of
the
their
Pingle
family.
family. His
When
whole
I saw
body
this,
was in pain.
if calling the
and his
police
head
was
was hurting
useful,
as well.
they wouldn't be alive.
It was as if he
and
had suffered
kicking.
a serious
They are
injury.
rich and powerful.
Since you were awake,
while I am
have just
good
a little
rest.
bit asterisk
Don't move
TCH.
around for the next 2 days.
I thought about it.
The
and
Empress
decided
said
to
faintly
sacrifice
as she
me
sat on a
for the
stool
happiness
not
of
far
thousands
away.
of families.
Following which,
Ren Bachyan had
she
a
left
look
in a
of,
hurry,
didn't want to do this,
as
but
if
I
she
had
was
no
escaping.
choice. Ren
Shin sure
Bachyan
was
wanted to
stunned
touch
when
his
he
head
heard
this,
this,
but just
this
as he was
fellow
about
really
to
knew
exert
how to back
force,
down.
he felt a
However,
burst of pain
it
on
was
his
much
back,
easier for
causing him
to
to
speak
break
this
out
way.
in cold sweat.
No matter what exactly
murder is
happened,
still a big crime.
Ren Bachyan was
However,
a loss.
the nation
How'd
is
he end up
very
like this?
interested in
After
some of the
carefully
things that you have
recalling for a
shown
long
and
time,
is willing to give you
he
a
remembered
chance.
that he had just
The
returned
Empress
from
raised
Milan
her
with the
eyebrows
Empress
and squinted her
drank
eyes.
2 glasses
Give
of
me a
wine with her.
chance.
The
After
table
that,
under her
he
hand
couldn't remember how he ended up
immediately
like this.
broke into a pile
Even if I
of
drank
broken
too much,
pieces.
it
And
shouldn't
everything
be
on the
as
table
if I was
fell
stepped
to the
on
ground.
by an elephant.
When Ren
right?
Bachyan
What
saw
exactly
the Empress
happened?
open her mouth, he knew something was wrong.
He immediately
Chapter
retracted his leg
274.
and was unscathed.
Those who have read
On the other hand,
264
Chinshur was spilled with
before
coffee
can watch
all
this
over his
again.
pants.
Previously,
Fortunately,
I thought of a plot.
the coffee
and
wasn't too
casually
hot
added
anymore.
it.
It was
Otherwise,
indeed inappropriate.
The consequences would
After
be
revising it,
unimaginable.
I posted
He
this.
was sweating
I
profusely.
repeat, it's
The main reason he was
264
sweating
million
was because of the aura emitted by Chi
264. It made him
Papa
unable
Ren's
to
hands
move,
trembled
and
slightly
his heart
when he
was
saw the
beating
familiar
wildly.
name on the phone.
It was as if it was
Hello,
about to
Dad.
explode.
I'm going back at the end of the
Before
year.
this, he had never
Ren
thought
Bachin's
that a
voice came from
person's
the phone
aura
and
could be
surprised
so
him.
terrifying.
He was surprised by the content.
Boss,
The
it's
quality
good to know
of
that
the
your
table
fine.
is too
Be well
poor.
outside
Ren
and don't call
Bachin
home.
turned his head and
Papa
shouted.
Ren said with a
Chinshur
trembling
was
voice.
speechless. Even after such
a
a long
while,
time,
the three
he
of
still
them
felt like
changed
he
to
was
another
struck
corner.
by lightning.
I remember that you
when he
said
thought
that
of
you
the
wanted to
news he just
cooperate.
heard.
Ren
I'm
Bachin
fine.
said faintly.
Don't think too much.
Now,
I'm not a
all the
wanted
grievances
criminal
on his
anymore.
face had disappeared.
Ren Bachin laughed
His
heartily.
expression was similar
What
to
happened?
that of the Empress.
Papa Ren was shocked.
Plain,
Wasn't he
and a little
wanted for
cold.
murder? It can
Ren
also be
Bachin
considered
said in a deep
cooperation.
voice.
Chinshur
Actually, I was
immediately
undercover.
changed the topic.
At that time,
This guy's expression
the police needed
really
information
changed
on a criminal gang.
Tell me about the specifics.
However, I happen to
Ren
have
Bachin
dealings with
continued.
them because of a
For
certain
example,
matter.
some of
Of
the
course,
things in your hands
wasn't illegal.
The laboratory
Therefore,
of you
the
and
police
Shen
found
Yan.
me.
I think
I
you have
consider
other
that it
things
wasn't
in your hands
dangerous
that are very
and became
valuable.
undercover.
For example,
Now that the
the
gang has
skills
been
of this
destroyed,
person.
I've
I'm
cleared
very
my
curious.
name.
Are there
Ren Bachin's
really
words
legendary
stunned Papa
cultivators
Ren.
in this world?
Really? If
Papa
so,
Ren didn't want to
can they
think
be
about the
imparted to
loopholes
others?
in his words.
There are a lot of
the
things
so-called
that the nation
finding
is
of Ren
interested in.
Bachin.
I
Because
think
he
there are
had
a lot
dealings
of
with
things
them
that you
felt
can give
wrong.
up.
In
However,
fact, they don't even
he was
affect
still
you.
willing to believe
At this
what his
point,
son had said.
Chinshur's eyes
Of course
were
it's
a little
true.
fervent.
Otherwise,
Ren
how would I
Bachin
dare to go
gently
back?
tapped his
Ren
fingers on the
Bachin
table.
said,
In that
"That's
case,
great.
what can we
That's
get?
great.
We can write
Papa
off
Ren's
everything
lips
that happened
trembled,
in the past
and he didn't know what to
suppress
say.
the domestic
Ren
affairs
Bachin felt
and
a little
revoke the
guilty.
arrest warrant. It's fine.
However,
I'll go
there's
back
a
in 2 months.
prerequisite.
Where are
You
you
can't
now?
act so
Papa
recklessly
Ren couldn't
and
help
must abide
but
by
ask.
the law.
At
After
the
so
same time,
long,
if
he
you have
finally
any other
dared to
requests,
ask this question,
you can raise them.
Traveling
I will
in
report
Europe
to the
Wait,
higher-ups.
I'll video you.
Chinshur
Ren
continued.
Bachin
Chinshur
then
thought
played
for
the
a
video
while
and spoke
and let
again.
Papa Ren
Also,
look at the scenery outside.
Did you say Emperor just
Come
now?
back soon.
I'm
Your
very
mother
curious
and I are
about this
very
person's
worried about
identity.
you.
Papa
Just
Ren
now,
said as he
the
looked at
Empress
the
said,
exotic
"Give me a
buildings
chance."
outside.
Understood.
In this half a day,
Go back as
he
soon
had
as
thought
possible.
of all kinds of
Tell my mother not
possibilities,
to worry.
but from the tone
Ren
and the
Bachin
content of
said.
the words, he
There
felt
won't be
that it
any
was
more
Emperor,
danger. He
right?
felt that there might be
Papa
a
Ren
huge
asked again
secret behind
and
it.
hung up,
and
after
this made
getting
him
a
a little
definite
excited.
answer.
The
Ren
Empress
Bachin
turned her
kept his
head to
phone
look at
and
Ren
turn
Bachin.
around.
The
Then
Empress
turned her
was sitting
head
on the
to the
sofa,
other side,
not to
far away
admire
from
the
him,
oil painting
flipping
on the
through
wall.
a fashion
Ren
magazine.
Bachin was silent
Although
for
she
a
couldn't
while.
understand it.
Then she
He
could look
lowered
at
his
the
voice
pictures.
and
At this
slowly
moment,
said,
the two
"Since
of them
you
were in a
sensed it,
hotel suite.
then I will
arranged
say
by
directly."
Chinshur.
Actually, after a
She
whole
is
day,
Wu-Zetian.
their passports
then, and a brand
she
new
gave up
bank
the
card was
throne
sent
to
over.
cultivate.
At this moment,
Now that
she
she
has
has
really
returned
nothing
from her
else
cultivation,
to do. They just had to wait
everything
for
in
the
the
two
world
of
has
them to
become
return to
smoke.
China. However,
Before they could start
she still has a
working
million
together.
soldiers.
The Empress
The
suddenly
nation
raised
will
her
lend
head and
us
said,
100
"You seem to
million
be lying
first.
all the time recently."
And after
in the
we
past 2 days,
unfreeze, she had
the
suddenly
1 million
discovered this
soldiers.
problem.
It made
Chinshur
her a
looked
little
as if he had
conflicted.
eaten **T.
People used to call
Ren
me an
Bachin
honest
pondered for a
and
while.
cute little husband.
What should he do
with a
However,
million soldiers?
After I gave
He
my
couldn't
only
possibly rebel,
sincere
right?
heart to someone,
These words couldn't be
I
said
can't take it out
carelessly.
anymore. Ren
After that,
Bachin
we can make a
said with
Tang
straight
Dynasty
face.
terracotta army
He sighed in his
or
heart.
something.
Back then, people really called him
Chapter
an honest and cute little
271.
husband.
Forget
That is my
about the
lost
million-strong
youth,
army,
as well as running
as for the
under setting
rest,
sun.
you can guess
Ren
if I'm telling
Bachin's
the
words
truth.
made the
Ren
Empress's heart
Bachin
beat
spread
a
his
little
hands
faster.
and said,
Every time this
Chinshur's
fellow's
mind was
said these
filled with
words,
the word
it was
emperor.
always like this.
Those who could say this
In that
word
case,
were
let's
either
go.
delusional
Ren
or
Bachin
he didn't
bowed
dare to think
slightly
about it
and
If it
extended
was someone
his
else,
hand in an
he would have
inviting
given them a
gesture.
slap.
However,
Ren Bachin
the
was
Empress's
speechless.
strength
2
made
days
him
later,
overthink. On the basis
After all,
of friendly
from
cooperation,
the current information,
Chinshur
the
resentfully
Empress's
arranged
strength
for
wasn't
someone to
something
handle
human
the
could
shopping
achieve.
bags in the suite
From a video
that Ren
her
Bachin
speed was
and the
twice
Empress
as
were staying in,
fast as
after
a human
leaving the
falling
room.
from the sky.
Ren Bachin
It was hard to see her figure
and the Empress
clearly
disappeared
and had to be
without a
played in
trace.
slow motion.
No one was able
In
to
other
track
words,
the two of them
a
at all.
normal person
Ren
fell from the
Bachin
sky
and the
at Empress
about 23
meters
meters
her
per
surroundings
second,
changed,
but she fell at more
and they
than
were already
70
meters
meters
per
second.
Palace Hall.
There was a
Little
light shone
more
in
than
through the
second
door
to cover 100
beside the
meters.
Empress's wooden
Imagine
couch
a person who was 100 meters away 1 second
light
and appeared in front of you in the next.
The hall was still a little
For an
dim.
ordinary person,
The Empress released
it was like
Botchian's
teleportation,
hand
and they wouldn't be able to react.
She lay on it
within short
lazily
distance.
and looked
Not to
around.
mention, the
change
Empress
between the
didn't
two
slow
worlds
down the
after
relaxation
carrying
in that
Botchian.
world. She
and
stepped on the
coldness
wall
after
and
returning
leaped to another
had also
building that was
affected her.
100 meters
That relaxed
away.
feeling
This
hadn't
showed that
faded,
she was even
and
more
she didn't want to
powerful.
stay here for a while.
This kind of speed
Pour some
and
wine for
jumping
me.
force wasn't
With
something
pleasure.
a human could achieve.
Rinpoche
Correspondingly, how
and
strong
put down
was
the
she?
two buckets in
If
his
she was a
hands.
cultivator, one of the two
Chunsher
buckets
would
was
believe it.
ammonia.
If she was
and
a
the
cultivator,
other was silver
how
nitrate,
long had she lived?
which was specially
What was her
used to
true
make silver
identity?
mirrors.
Chunsher
As for the
didn't
other
even
things,
dare to
they could
think
be
about
obtained in this
It was
world,
really
but
terrifying
it was
to
slightly
think about
more
it.
troublesome.
Rinpoche
However,
looked at Chunsher's
this world
grave
had to
face
develop
and was
basic
pondering the
physics and
pros and
chemistry.
cons of saying
Otherwise,
this.
if the
lot
other
of
party
things couldn't
really
be done,
thought that the
and they
Empress
couldn't bring
was a
everything
cultivator,
from Earth either.
it wasn't that he couldn't
After going
produce
in
a
and out of
secret
Yangshin
manual.
Palace Hall,
The
every
secret
day,
manuals of Great
Rinpoche
Xia
knew
were enough
where
for
the
them
wine was
to
kept.
chew on for a while.
He went straight to the wine
Moreover,
jug.
the
and returned with
lifespan
a
of an
wine
Earth Wheel
cup to
expert
pour
would
the
indeed
empty cup.
increase.
Seeing
An
the
Earth
Empress
embryo
drink the
expert
wine
could
in
live
one
up to
gulp.
100 years
Rinpoche
and
filled it up again.
A spirit wheel
Drink
expert
with me,
could
the
live up
Empress
to
said.
150
Rinpoche
years.
poured
There was
himself
an
a
even
cup,
higher level
motioned for her to
above the
drink it,
spirit wheel
and
realm,
the wine flowed
which was
down
comparable
her
to the
esophagus
Aboriginals'
and
longevity
into her
heaven.
stomach like a knife.
It wasn't
He
exaggeration
went to the side,
to say
opened
that
his
it was a
laptop,
cultivation technique.
searched for a bit.
At the same
and played
time,
canon.
there was an
The
advantage
slow
to
sound of
saying
piano
this,
played,
which was that the
and a
things in
warm
his hands
atmosphere
could be
grew in the
explained.
hall.
After
Otherwise,
drinking another cup
there
of
were
wine,
many things that couldn't be
Rinpoche
explained.
stretched out his hand
As for whether or
and
not
said,
it would be exposed,
Your Majesty,
it would have
do
to
you wanna
wait
dance?
until someone on
I saw
Earth
it at the
reached
restaurant
spirit
yesterday.
wheel realm.
Rinpoche
Rinpoche
believed
believed
that
that
martial arts would be widely
where the two of them
disseminated in a
witnessed
short
a
period
couple
of time.
proposing.
Given the
Everyone
small
at the
number
scene
of people who
gave their
practiced
blessings
martial
and
arts,
applause.
it would take a
And the
long
restaurant
time
played
for
the
someone
canon
to
until reach
reach
the
the
spirit will level.
If Rinpoche
In their
didn't
joy,
remember wrongly,
the couple
Great
danced
Xiao's
along with the
cultivation
music.
technique
Rinpoche
also required
still
some
hadn't
rare
forgotten that
treasures.
scene until
Was there
now.
really someone on
The
Earth
Empress's
who could
eyes
reach the
curved.
spirit will
She was a
level?
little moved.
Moreover,
This music could
he
really
was not
touch
worried
people's
that someone
hearts.
on Earth would
She was also a
cultivate
little
to an
hesitant.
extremely high level.
She had never done such a
On the
thing
contrary,
before.
if
And her
Earth
status
could really
made
find
her
a way to
disdain
cultivate
doing
to
such
a very
things.
high level,
Rinpoche
it was not
took a step
necessarily a
forward,
bad thing for
held
him.
the Empress's
Perhaps he
fingers
could push himself
and said,
to a higher
"Why
level.
don't you give it a try
Otherwise,
and see how it feels?"
He really doubted
the two
how
of them
far he would be
stood
able to go on his
facing
own.
each other.
After
The
all,
Empress
he was
and
unable to
Rinpoche
cultivate other
looked about the
techniques,
same height,
and no one
and
knew
they could
what
look
the
straight
into
into
each
each
other's
other's
technique
eyes.
was like.
Rinpoche,
Even though he could
put one hand on the
smoothly
Empress's
advance to the
shoulder
earth wheel level,
and the other on
there
her
was still a
waist.
barrier
A
after
warm
that.
and
If he were to
soft
stop at
touch
the
was
earth wheel
transmitted
level,
to his palm,
the lifespan
causing
of
his
an
heart
earth wheel
to
expert
flutter.
was only 100
This was the first
years.
time
At the same
and the
time,
Empress
because
were
he had
so
traveled
intimate.
between two
The
worlds,
Empress felt a
due
pair
to the
of
difference
men's
in the flow
hands
of
on her
time,
body.
his
She was a little
lifespan
nervous
might be
and
shorter
all the
than
hair
those
on
who
her
had
body
always been
stood
in
on
the
end.
world.
She
The
had
Empress
never
could
felt this way
live to
before,
200 years old,
and it was a completely
and if she broke
unfamiliar
through to
feeling.
longevity heaven,
Don't be nervous.
she could live
The
to
first step
300
is like
years old.
this.
The
This was
second
very
step
likely.
is like this.
As for whether
and the
this would
third
pose a
step.
threat to him,
Rinpoche
he had never
comforted
worried
the
about
Empress
this
softly.
problem.
He
However,
had the backing
the
of
Empress
world,
became even
and he would
more
also be
nervous.
rich and
Such an intimate
powerful on
action,
Earth.
and the
No
warmth
matter
from his
how
hands
bad his
made her
situation
feel
was,
it
as
wouldn't
if
be
an
too
elephant
bad.
was ramming
It was much
around
better
her heart.
than if he were to
Her
stop at
ears
the
had
earth
also
wheel
turned
level in
red.
the future.
She felt that
At the
she had
thought
never
of
been
this,
so
he
clumsy
had an
before.
idea
and
and
was
was
prepared
prepared
to
to
make
make
a
a
big
big
lie.
most
Of
powerful
course,
expert
he had to do
in
it
the
bit by
world
bit.
had completely
No one would
cherish
disappeared.
things that came
At this
too
moment,
easily. The Empress
Chunsher,
looked over
who was
Rinpoche's
sitting opposite
shoulder
him,
and
pondered
saw
for a
Qing
long
Yuan
time
and
before
Hong
raising
Wan
his
at the
head
door
and
with their
asking,
mouths wide open.
"What other requests
The
do you
Empress
have?
was nervous.
You can raise them all
and
at once.
Subconsciously,
I will
exert
report
a
to the
little
higher
force.
ups together."
Bang.
Money.
Rinpoche
Give me 100
immediately
million
flew
euros
out
first.
and stuck to the
I
wall
have no
of
money to
Yangshin
spend.
Palace Hall. If he didn't
An
come,
hour later,
I was
Rinpoche
prepared to rob
woke
someone.
up and found
Rinpoche
himself
spread
lying
his
on the
hands
bed
on the
in
table
Table Park,
and finally
his whole
spoke the
body
truth.
was in pain.
Chunsher pondered
his head
for a
was
while.
aching as
When
well.
Rinpoche
It was as if
ran
he had
away,
suffered a
he brought
serious
1
injury.
million euros
Since
with
you were
him,
awake,
which was
rest
only
well.
slightly more
Don't
than
move around for the
100,000
next 2
euros.
days.
If he was a
The
little
Empress
extravagant,
said faintly from
it would be gone
stool,
very
not
quickly.
far away.
How would the two of them
Following
make
which,
money after that?
she left in a
Work?
hurry to
As
quote
as
a
if she
famous
was
saying,
escaping.
it was impossible
Rinpoche
to
wanted
work,
to touch his head,
not even in this
but
lifetime.
just as he was about to
If the
exert
two of them could
force,
find a place
he felt
to
a
work
burst of
and
pain
earn
on his
money,
back,
he would
causing
tear
him
off
to
his
break
head
out
and
in
kick
a
it like a
cold
ball.
sweat.
In that case,
What exactly
he was
happened?
afraid
Rinpoche
that it would
was at a
really be
loss.
like what the other
How did he
party
become
said.
like this?
At the thought of this,
After carefully
Chinshur
recalling
didn't
for a
know
long
whether to
time,
laugh or
he
cry.
remembered
These
that
two
he had
people really
just
made him
returned from
speechless.
Milan with the Empress.
Forget about 100
Then,
million.
he drank
The
2
country's
glasses
money
of
doesn't
wine
come
with the
from
Empress.
nowhere. I can
After
help
that,
you settle the
he
domestic
couldn't remember
affairs.
how he became like
You seem to
this.
have money with
Even
someone
if I
else,
drank
right?
too much, I don't even
It
have
shouldn't
money.
be
How
as
can
if
I
I stepped on
cooperate?
by an elephant, right?
Rinpoche retorted.
What exactly happened?
Chinshur was speechless.
He had to admit that the other party was really a bastard.
Chapter 2.
He was representing the
75.
country. After
Could he
lying
not
in
be
bed
so
for 2
straightforward?
days and
What can you
using
offer
a
in
lot of
exchange
precious
for
herbs,
cooperation?
Rinpoche
Chinshur
was finally
emphasized
able
the
to get
word
up and move
cooperation.
around.
Up
Some
until
rare
now, he
and
still didn't know what
precious
exactly
treasures.
happened.
But
But
he
he
knew the
Rinpoche
condition of his
pondered
body.
about the things
Many
from that
bones
world.
in his back and
Many of
shoulder
them
blades
should
were
be
cracked,
considered rare,
and he almost had a
precious.
concussion.
It seemed like he was hit by a truck.
They were things from another
But how could there be a truck
As for
in
whether they
Yangxin
were rare or
household?
not,
The only
he could just
person who could
change
do
to
it was
something
the
else.
Empress.
Furthermore,
However, he still had
when
a
he
killer
asked
weapon,
this question,
the
the
elongation
Empress avoided
saber.
it, and
Although
even
the
her
saber
ears
was a
turned
little
red,
weak,
and
this
would
made him
break at the
even more
slightest
curious
touch.
about what
This didn't
happened
mean
that
that
day.
the elongation
If he said that
saber
he
was
angered the
worthless.
Empress after
If it
drinking
could be
and
researched,
was beaten up by
imagine
her,
soldiers
why did her
fighting
ears
with
turn
daggers
red?
and bayonets.
She would only behave
and
like
suddenly
this when she
growing
was
2
shy.
meters.
But what
Furthermore,
exactly
with
happened?
Earth's technology,
If he couldn't
they might
figure
not
out,
necessarily
he
be
didn't
able
want
to
to think
research
about it.
anything from
The
it.
Empress wouldn't tell
For
him
example,
either.
1 kilogram of
Hong Yuan
becoming
should know.
1 kilogram
But
of
they
iron,
didn't say anything
1
either.
kilogram of gold
Even if he
becoming
racked his
1
brains,
kilogram of
he
gold,
wouldn't have thought that he
1
would
barrel
dance
of
with
oil
the Empress,
becoming 2
let
barrels
alone cause a
if
murder.
she is really
When he was
an
able to move a
immortal
little,
cultivator,
he asked someone
will
to
the
carry
martial
him
arts
to the
of
empty space
immortality
next to the
work.
training ground
Chen
beside
Shi
the palace
asked the question
and told the
that he
people
was
from the
most
Ministry of
concerned about.
Works about his
You
plans
can't
for
become
school.
fat in one
fact,
go.
it was just
As
to
for
erect a
cooperation
wall
and build
let's
a
do it
few
bit by
houses.
bit.
In addition to the
Rinpoche
3
didn't
houses
reject
for school,
and left some
there was
hope
also
for the
a
other party.
library for books
I need to report
and
to the
reading
higher-ups.
and a laboratory.
Please wait a moment.
However, the first
Chen
thing
Shi
to do
gestured to the
was
two of
build
them
the 3
and stood up to
houses.
leave. The rest
After
could
he
be done
left,
slowly.
the Empress turned
After
her
another
head
2
and
days,
asked, "Who is
Rinpoche
Wu
was
Zetian,
finally able
the
to
only
move
female
by
empress in
himself.
history?
Although his body
the
was
most
still in
famous
pain,
woman,
it
and
wasn't
much more
a big deal.
powerful than most
This
men.
world was indeed
Rinpoche
unique
was spouting
in terms of
nonsense
medicine.
just
Whether
now,
it was the black
and
mud
hurriedly
cream
explained
or
to
the
the
medicine
Empress
this time.
now.
With his
I
previous
myself,
injuries,
I don't need to
he would probably
impersonate
need
anyone,
at least a month
and
to
no one
walk
can be
on
compared
Earth.
to me.
100
The Empress
days
looked
to recover from
unhappy.
serious
If
injury
it was someone else,
wasn't an exaggeration.
she would have smashed him
when they
into
returned
a
to
meat
Earth.
patty.
The two of them
Of
went
course,
directly to
it's
Spain.
just that you can't
and
tell
stayed
them
there
about
for
your
3
identities.
days.
And
In fact,
they have
there was
no
a
way
place
of
in
knowing
Spain that
you are the most
Rinpoche
unique
wanted
one.
to see.
No one
It
can
was
be compared to
Barcelona's
you, be it in
celestial
the
beach.
past or
In
in
the
the future.
past, he
Just
only
like
heard
the
about
words
it
on
on
the
the
internet,
mirror
and
always wanted to
Rinpoche
see it.
comforted her softly.
However, the
weather
Empress
wasn't right,
naturally knew
and the
that her
Empress was
identity
beside him.
couldn't be
The
revealed
Empress
in this
almost
world.
flipped the table
After
when
hearing
she
what he
saw the
said,
bikini.
she
If she
ignored
saw
him
celestial
and turned her
beach,
dissatisfaction
Rinpoche
felt
into
that he
appetite.
wouldn't have a good ending.
She ordered another
You won't
serving
die
of
if you
dessert.
don't court disaster.
After waiting for a while,
Rinpoche
Chen Shi
deeply
hurriedly
agreed with this
returned.
wise
After sitting
saying
down,
of
he
the
said,
ancients.
"Someone wants to talk
This
to you."
time, the
Rinpoche
Europe trip
brought
hasn't
along a
ended
set
yet.
of glass laboratory
Rinpoche
utensils
waved his hand
and glucose.
A video call will
Then
do. He headed
Chen Shi
straight to the
said,
glass factory
Rinpoche nodded.
with his imperial
Let's go to another
bodyguards.
place.
As soon
At
as
the
he
same
arrived
time,
at the glass
we also want to
factory,
know how strong
a burly
she
man
is
greeted him
and how
strong
strong
she
she
is.
This
After
burly man
all,
was called
there are many
Jiao
things that we
Zhua,
need to see
and he'd
with
been
our
working
own
for the
eyes
imperial family
before we can be at ease. Rinpoche
Previously,
looked at the
when the glass
Empress.
factory was
Even
being
though there
built,
wasn't much change in her
Rinpoche
expression,
and the Empress
he could imagine
wanted
that
him,
she was
and he was finally
unhappy.
assigned to this
He
position.
moved closer to her.
This person had
and
followed the
whispered,
caravan to the
"Mortals,
Nation and
let me show
Dayo
you my
a few
strength.
times.
You should
and
have
was
this kind of
literate.
thought."
Furthermore,
His breath
he was one of the
tickled
few
the Empress's
ancient race
ear,
members who were
and her
more
body
cautious
trembled
and
a little.
meticulous.
However,
He would be a pretty good helper.
after hearing his
Of
words,
course,
she
his
felt that it wasn't
cautiousness
that
and
hard to
meticulousness
accept.
was only
She
relative.
just felt that this
In the
sentence
beginning,
was
it caused a lot of
indescribably
trouble.
shameful.
However,
Chen Shi made a
things
phone
had
call
gotten better
first.
recently.
After
How
a
have you
while,
been recently?
when the three of
Is
them
the
went
color
out,
of the glass
there was
gone?
already a car waiting
Rinpoche
outside.
asked
Before getting into the
off
car,
the horned cow.
Rinpoche
Sir,
whispered
run
to the Empress,
I was just about to
"Don't
report
use your
that the
full
color of the
strength
glass
to
is
show
much
a
lighter
little bit
than
of
before.
strength." I reckon
The
that we will
Empress
be able
waved
to
her
produce
hand.
colorless
She didn't need
glass
Rinpoche to
very
say
soon.
this.
In
Jiao's
fact,
was said
her
with a
other
joyful
state
look
was
on
her
his face.
true strength.
Let's go take a look.
Rinpoche
didn't know
nodded
about
slightly,
this,
and
a
not
moment
many
later,
people knew about it.
he saw a flat
Hua
piece
Sanlu
of
knew
glass
about it, but
placed
he
in a
was
room.
already dead.
Part of it was
The
green
8
in the
pavilion
past,
masters were dead
while
as
the other
well.
part was green
The two
now.
disciples who
Comparing
barely
the two
survived
pieces,
couldn't
one
tell
could see that the
anything
color
about
was
the
much
Empress's
lighter.
condition.
Well done.
After a while,
Rinpoche
everyone
nodded.
appeared
It's what I should
outside
do.
the city.
Jiao's
in a remote
grinned.
place.
Have you made the mold
After
that I
getting out of
asked
the
you to
car,
make?
Chen Shi
Rinpoche
fiddled with his
asked.
laptop for
Yes.
a while,
And I tried to
pointed
make
the
some of
screen
them.
at the two of them.
Jiao's will open
On
the
the other
box
side
to
of the
side
screen
and
was a
revealed some
middle-aged
glass
man
cups
wearing glasses.
They were all classical
very
cups and
dignified.
goblets,
but he
and their
shouldn't
color
be
was
the
also a
main
little
character.
green.
Sir, if we
Rinpoche
bring these
guessed that
things
the
to the
main
Yun
character
Nation
was
and
still at the
great
back.
Xia,
We want to take
they
a
can
look
be
at the
sold for a high
authenticity
price.
first.
Jiao's
Then we will
was said
discuss
with a
some
smile.
issues.
Middle-aged
Rinpoche
man
picked up
said.
two of them.
The Empress
and looked at them
and
carefully.
Rinpoche looked at
He
each
shook his
other
head
in a
slightly
split
and
second.
said,
"They're
"The Empress
still a little
appeared
rough.
50
The
to
thickness
60
of the
meters
walls
away,
and the bottom of the
lifted her
cups
leg.
aren't very
Boom.
uniform.
There was a rumbling
Remake the molds
sound,
and get
even
the
through the
best
screen.
craftsmen.
They could feel
Got
the
it, sir.
ground tremble.
Jiao's had a look
The
of
ground
regret
around
in his
the
eyes.
Empress. He
Which
felt
was
that
at
the
least
ones in the
200
box
to
were
300
pretty
square
good.
meters.
However,
was all
they still weren't up to
cracked and
standards
stones
under the
deputy
soil were
prefect
protruding.
run.
Regardless
Following
of
which,
whether it was
Rinpoche
moved the
other
box that
world
contained the
or
glassware
the person
out
on the other
and
side
found
of
a
the
room
screen
to
everyone
conduct
was
the
stunned.
silver mirror
It was one
reaction
thing to
experiment.
guess it,
When
but another to
Jiao's
see
was
it
saw
with
the
their own
glassware that
eyes.
Rinpoche took
Regardless
out.
of
He
whether
finally
it was appearing
understood
50
why
to 60
Rinpoche
meters away
didn't like the
in a
glass
split
cups that they
second,
made.
or the
color
power
of the
this
bottles
kick
and jars
was
that
shocking,
Rinpoche took out
especially
was
the power
pure
of this
and
kick.
transparent.
It didn't seem
There
to
were
cover
almost
a
no
large
flaws,
area,
and
but
the
one
glass
had to
cups
remember
that they
that this
made
was
could
land.
not be compared.
Normally,
For the next few
kick was
days,
very
Rinpoche would go to the
be like a
glass
pile
factory
driver
every day,
directly nailing
every
the
day.
ground.
He would use
However,
those glass bottles
the
and
Empress
jars
covered
to
the
conduct
entire
experiments
area with
in
her
that
power
small room,
and
he
used
would
it on a
mumble
single
words like
surface.
sodium hydroxide.
Furthermore,
Furthermore,
it wasn't a
nitrate,
flat surface that was
ammonia,
pressed down
and so on that
but the
no one could
ground was
understand.
uprooted.
From time to time,
Just the method
he
of
would
using
kick
this
the wall
power
in frustration.
was already beyond imagination.
Hearing the angry screams from inside.
Chapter
The Imperial
272.
bodyguards outside
On the other
were
side of the
already used
screen,
to it.
although Rinpoche
Could only see
in
one
any case,
person,
no
there
matter
were
what
actually many
Rinpoche was
people
doing
watching
inside,
this scene.
they
It
just
could be
didn't
said
let
that
anyone
every
in to
one of
disturb
them
him.
was a person
After spending
of
a few days
status.
and
After
experiencing
all,
dozens
this
of
matter was
failures,
too important
Rinpoche
and might
finally
even affect the
completed the
future
silver
of
mirror
mankind.
reaction
Can
experiment.
I look at something else?
For most people,
The bespectacled
this
middle-aged man
could be
on the
completed
screen
in 2
pushed
hours.
his spectacles up
When he looked at the
and
palm-sized
said
mirror in his hand,
Rinpoche
his face
sneered.
was filled
In the next
with
second,
joy.
a gun
His
appeared in
chemistry
his
teacher
hand,
could
and he
finally
pointed
rest
it at
in
Chunshur's
peace
head
in another world.
Sakama
After the
drenched
first
in
time,
ketchup.
do you
The
want to see
second
it?
time would be much
The
easier.
veins on Chunshur's
Rinpoche
forehead
called a
were
few
throbbing.
craftsmen over.
This guy really
and taught
flipped
them how to
out
make
at
the
drop
silver
of a hat.
mirror step by
The
step.
man on the screen was
in the
stunned
afternoon,
at first. Cries
then
of
his
face
and
turned angry.
"Why are you guys
we
as
are willing to
stupid as
display our
pigs?"
strength,
could be heard
but it
come
doesn't
from the room
mean that
again.
you can casually
Sir, what's a
make
pig?
requests.
Someone asked.
Are you waiting to see
Return
the
to the
performance?
city.
Do you want to
Rinpoche
perform a duet for you?
stormed
To
out of
see?
the room with
Rinpoche
blue
sneered,
veins popping
in a
out
place
on
where
his
the
forehead.
screen
Liu
couldn't be
Pinghai
seen.
should be here in the
A
next few
few people
days,
almost
right?
spat out
A
their
handsome
tea.
young man
This guy's
dressed in
mouth was a little
embroidered
too
clothes
poisonous.
asked while riding
However,
on a horse.
such a reaction
Young
was
master,
very normal.
this is the news.
After all,
a
that
middle-aged
woman
man
might be
with
a
a long
so-called
spear on his
immortal
back replied.
cultivator. Looking at the
It would
young
be
man
strange
beside
if she
him,
was easy
there was
to
a
talk
trace
to.
of regret.
The difference in
his eyes.
strength allowed
The last
her
descendant
to
of the
completely
Yu
look
family
down
was
on
actually a
ordinary
cripple. In
Why don't we
terms of
talk to someone
cultivation.
else?
Unless he
The
could get his
person behind
hands
you,
on Liu
at least show your
Pinghai's
face,
spirit
right?
yuan pill.
Otherwise,
it was
I don't
just
even
that
know
he
who
didn't
I'm
know
talking
if
to.
the item that he
right?
brought this time would make him
Rinpoche
relent.
asked again.
I will definitely
After
succeed.
Rinpoche finished
Even Liu
speaking,
Pinghai
he waited for
will
the
be tempted
response
by
from
this
item.
item.
I will get the spirit
room,
yuan pill,
an old
and
man
take back
put down
what
his
belongs
teacup
to me,
and nodded
young
to the
man
person
said with a
beside him.
smile.
Connected.
In his eyes,
After a while,
there wasn't a trace
the
of
screen
doubt on
went
whether
dark.
he could succeed
When it lit up
or
again,
not.
the people
Everything
and
that
environment
happened
in the screen
was
had
God's way of
changed.
training for me.
An old man
I will
sat
definitely
on a chair
succeed.
and nodded
I will return the
slightly toward the
disdain
screen and
hello, big boss.
supercilious looks that those
Rinpoche
people
put the gun
gave me
behind
one
him
by one.
and immediately
Uncle
had a
Ping,
radiant look
it has
on
been
his
hard on
face.
you all these
This
years.
was a real big boss.
If it wasn't for your
He had seen him
kindness
on
to the Yu
television
family,
more than once.
I'm afraid I
Mr.
wouldn't be
Run,
alive today.
I don't know how
The
you would
young
like
man
us to
sighed.
address you.
It's my
Let's
duty.
call you this first.
The man addressed as
The old
Uncle
man
Ping
smiled.
replied. His
You're
voice
an
was
Earth
very
embryo
slow,
realm
and his
expert,
tone was very
and yet you're
amiable.
guarding a cripple.
We
like
have
me.
reached a consensus.
You don't know
on
how
the
many
matter of
people are
cooperation.
secretly cursing
In that
you.
case, the young
Let's
man
discuss on the
said with a
basis of
smile.
cooperation.
If it wasn't for
and
Uncle
seek
Ping,
common ground,
he wouldn't
while
even be able to
reserving
keep the
differences.
last things that
We have some
belong to the Yu
ideas,
family.
and Mr.
Uncle
Ren,
Ping smiled.
you should also
and
have
didn't
your
reply.
requests.
When the two
Both
of them
sides
reached
should
the
state them.
outskirts of the village,
This is the
the
basis
young
of
man
communication,
stopped
right?
and looked at it.
Rinpoche
It's really
applauded.
shabby. As expected
Then,
of a big
he
shot,
turned to look at
the way he
forest at the
spoke was
side.
different. That was where
He
the
immediately
grave
set
of
the
Lu
tone.
Qi.
First of all,
Liu
I want to
Pinghai's
ask
best
best
friend.
friend.
It doesn't affect our
At
cooperation.
this moment,
But
Uncle
I want to
Ping's
understand
expression
something on the
suddenly
basis of our
changed.
cooperation.
Young master,
Was there anyone
be
else
careful.
like Ms. Chi?
Before he
Is it
finished
just
a
her?
sentence,
Or
he
had
had
already
already
appeared in front of the young
Rinpoche
man
thought
at
about
lightning
it
speed
and felt that
the
the
other
long
party's
spear on
question
his back
very
was
sharp.
already held
The problem
horizontally
affected
in his
a
hand,
wide range of
deflecting
areas.
2 incoming arrows.
A surprise sound came from the forest. Then 2 burly men who looked exactly the same walked out from the forest. You're the third batch. Aboriginals. Uncle Ping's expression changed. The other party should have the same purpose as him. As for the other party saying that he was the third batch, there was no need to ask about the whereabouts of the previous 2 batches. Do you want to do it, or should I? The 2 Aboriginal men looked at each other. Rock, paper, scissors. Uncle Ping's face turned red. No matter what, he was still an Earth embryo realm expert. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Come. The limit is 10 moves. If you don't die, I'll let you go. One of the burly men walked out with an expression as if he had won a prize. He looked at the broadsword in the other party's hand. It looked like the standard broadsword of Dayo, but it was longer and thicker. Young master, step back first, Uncle Ping said in a deep voice. He didn't doubt the other party's words. Once the Aboriginals made a promise, they wouldn't go back on it. As long as he could withstand 10 moves from the other party, he was still confident in his strength. The other party had underestimated underestimated him. He had a move that had never failed before. Those who had seen it before were all dead. Unfortunately, there were two opponents this time, and he could only use that move once. 2 minutes later, the burly man spat at the corpse in front of him. Then, he punched the sorrowful young man to death. He then dragged the two corpses into the forest. "And what's this? It looks like something good." A voice came from the forest. "Keep it. I'll show it to the great general when I get back." Chapter 276. In the Eastern Sea, an old man in green robes stopped outside a small fishing village. The old man had nothing on him other than a flute at his waist and a jar of wine in his hand. Looking at the somewhat dilapidated village, the elder's gaze was filled with sorrow and nostalgia, as well as reminiscing about the years that had passed. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. "I'm afraid that in a few years, this village will no longer exist." The old man stood outside the village for a long time before turning around and walking toward the small forest nearby. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. "Come out," the old man said in a deep voice. As soon as the old man's voice fell, two men wearing coarse clothes walked out from the small forest in front of them. They had the same face, the same height, the same sturdy body, the same bald head, and the simple expression on their faces. Just by looking at their faces, they gave people the impression that they were simple men from the mountains. However, the long sabers on their shoulders gave them an austere aura. "Eighth in the world, Lu Pinghai. We two brothers have been waiting for you for a long time." The two of them spoke at the same time, their voices somewhat muffled. Lu Pinghai looked at the two of them without moving his brows. Aboriginals rarely appeared in the other nations, but they had specifically come here. It was unknown whose orders they were under. His Majesty said that he wants to exchange a primary spirit elixir with you. "You can name your conditions," the two continued. True enough, Lu Pinghai suddenly realized that it was Qi Zixiao. "Tell Qi Zixiao that I don't want anything. You can go back." Lu Pinghai shook his head. "Her Majesty said that if you don't agree, she will look for you personally," the two of them said. The Empress actually said that if Run Baqian didn't agree, she would beat him to death. But if he said that, Lu Pinghai would probably turn hostile on the spot. No matter what, he was still ranked 8th in the world. How could he allow others to threaten him like this? "Then let Qi Zixiao come and find me." Lu Pinghai laughed and walked past the two of them, not even sparing them a glance. Although Qi Zixiao was ranked 5th in the world, and there was also Hong Wu, who was ranked 9th in the world, he was not afraid of them. As the 8th most powerful expert in the world, he definitely had his own confidence. If they hadn't fought, who knew what would happen? Qi Zixiao was originally ranked 7th, but didn't he also kill the 5th Hua Sanlu? How could he not have any trump cards? "Lu Pinghai, do you really want to offend His Majesty for a primary spirit Dan?" Both of them turned around, their hands already on their blades. "Although Qi Zixiao is powerful, she won't make me hand over my things just because of her words. Today, for Qi Zixiao's sake, I'll let you two leave. Don't act recklessly." Lu Pinghai coldly snorted and swung his sleeves behind him. Immediately, his sleeves extended several meters like snakes and coiled around the hilts of the two sabers. Clang! The two of them unsheathed their long sabers and slashed at their sleeves. However, a sudden force came from the sleeves and pushed the sabers away. The two long sabers slashed at their own necks. Roar! The two of them lowered their heads at the same time, their blades crisscrossing as they slashed at each other's sleeves. However, they missed. The sleeve loosened its grip on the saber hilt as if it was a living thing, then heavily struck the two men's chests. The two men could not help but fall back. They only stopped after retreating 7 or 8 steps. Blood flowed from the corner of their mouths. Lu Pinghai was surprised. Even an expert who had just attained the spirit wheel level wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, let alone a direct hit on their chests. Yet, the two of them were still standing there. The Aboriginals really had a lot of experts, and they were already this strong with just 2 people sent out. It's not easy to cultivate. I'll let you two off today. Lu Pinghai left these words and disappeared into the forest. The 2 men looked at each other, turned around, and left. Since the 2 of them were no match for him, they had to go back and tell the general about Lu Pinghai's rejection. Lu Pinghai entered the forest, went straight to his residence, and finally sat down in an open space. His old friend had lived here for decades, but now he couldn't even find his grave. However, this was also good since no one would disturb him. He knew where Rinpoche lived even with his eyes closed. "I'm back to see you again." Lu Pinghai opened the wine gourd, drank a mouthful, and sprinkled a little on the ground. He looked at the silver mirror in his hand, and then at the craftsman in Jiaozhua in front of him. "How many days did it take for you to make this silver mirror? How stupid are you? Even a dark-faced man is smarter than you." A dark-faced man was a nickname for a wild boar. 2 days. Rinpoche squinted at the craftsman who answered him. Even a black-faced man would be able to make these things in 2 days. The craftsmen lowered their heads and listened to him quietly. A row of tall and burly men stood there with their heads lowered like a wall. Rinpoche nagged for a long time before finally saying, "Each of you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver, and your monthly allowance will be increased by 1 level." Even though these people were hopelessly stupid, they still managed to do it. They should be scolded and rewarded. "Thank you, sir." Everyone immediately put on a smile. 10 taels of silver was equivalent to more than 2 months of their monthly allowance. Furthermore, their monthly allowance would be increased by 1 level, which was a lot of money. "All of you may leave." Rinpoche let the craftsman leave first and then instructed Jiaozhua on the main tasks. At this moment, the most important ones were concave and flat mirrors, which were used to make solar furnaces. After these were completed and the Mount Damo iron or mine was settled, they could then sell it to other countries through caravans to make money. For the next period of time, Rinpoche woke up in the morning and went to the glass factory. At noon, he returned to the palace and practiced martial arts in the afternoon. After the problems with the glass and silver plating were solved, the next step was much smoother. Even though the production speed of the glass factory wasn't fast, it was much faster than when they first started. The ratio of the materials had also been found, and the number of problems had decreased. After a week, the concave and silver mirrors had already filled 2 rooms. Next, Rinpoche led the craftsmen to the glass factory every day to use wood and wrought tan to make square shelves. The shelves were also concave. Then, the mirrors were fixed on the shelves. A few days later, in the afternoon, a convoy of more than 100 people majestically left Lawn City and headed straight for the glass factory outside the city. However, they didn't enter the newly built brick building. Instead, they went to an open space beside the glass factory. At this moment, there was a wooden platform there. On top of the platform, there was a huge shelf that was 6 meters tall and 12 meters wide. On top of the shelf were concave mirrors. From a distance, it was dazzling and blinding. Many people covered their eyes with their hands to block the white light. The Empress came down from the carriage. Behind her were Shi Qing, Zhizhahai, Tu Wan, Tong Jinya, Qin Chuan, and the other high-ranking officials from the 6 ministries. As long as they were free, they were pulled over by the Empress. Everyone was guessing what the Empress wanted to see by calling so many people over. At this moment, when they saw the distorted scenery reflected in the concave mirrors on the tall shelf, Shi Qing, Zhikohai, Tong Jinya, and the others immediately knew what it was. It was just that they didn't know if it was like what Deputy Prefect Rin said. If it was, it would be a joyous occasion. The others looked at the large mirror in front of them with curiosity. "Is that a mirror? I don't know what it is made of. It doesn't look like a bronze mirror, but it's actually so bright. But the reflection doesn't seem to be moving. Look at the stone in the mirror, it's deformed. Hey, look at the person reflected in the mirror. His body is so short. I'm dying of laughter." The Empress looked at the large mirror in front of her. After sizing it up for a moment, she said to Rinpoche, "You can start now." Rinpoche looked very relaxed. After such a long time, he had finally made this. Now was the time to showcase it. He hoped that this bunch of idiots wouldn't mess it up. Following his greeting, 30 guards who were usually in charge of his arrangements ran to one side and carried out 30 mirrors that were 2 meters long and 1 meter tall. Then, they placed them on the ground in front of the shelf. Following which, someone carried out a 4 meters long iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl
and placed it on the ground. Rinpoche walked to the front of the 30 mirrors and adjusted the angle of one of them to reflect the sunlight onto the concave mirror on the shelf. Then, after the concave mirror focused the sunlight onto the top of the iron pillar. After he adjusted the angle, the others followed his movements and began to adjust the mirror. From time to time, Rinpoche helped everyone adjust the mirror. At the beginning, many people had their eyes on him. However, as the Empress, Shi, and the others stared at the top of the iron pillar, more and more people looked over. They were doubtful about what they could see, but immediately they got a huge shock. The top of the iron pillar suddenly burst into flames for no reason. One had to know that this was an iron pillar. Everyone wasn't blind. From the footsteps of the person carrying the iron pillar and the way it stood up, it was definitely an iron pillar. But how could an iron pillar catch fire? Something even more surprising happened. Not only was the top of the iron pillar on fire, but it was also melting. Dark red, molten iron flowed down the body of the pillar. Very quickly, the top of the iron pillar was missing a chunk. Not only were those who saw it for the first time shocked, even Shi and the others were surprised. Previously, it was only a round plate that burned a hole in a steel saber. Now, it melted an iron rod that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl. The difficulty was more than 10 times or even 100 times greater. Therefore, when they personally saw the effect, they were all shocked. I congratulate Your Majesty and Dayo. Deputy Prefect Run has made a great contribution by making this item. Within 100 years, Dayo will no longer have to worry about a shortage of iron, Shi said, loudly with a face full of joy. Following his words, everyone reacted and congratulated Her Majesty one after another. Although they didn't know what happened, they understood one thing. That iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl had been melted. In that case, Mount Damo's iron mine would soon have a steady stream of fine iron ore. They would no longer have to worry about the lack of military equipment. This was indeed a joyous occasion, and Rinpoche, who had contributed the most to this matter, had a higher status in the hearts of many people. Previously, when Her Majesty said that she wanted him to set up an academy, everyone didn't take it too seriously. Many people didn't even consider it. In the future, if Her Majesty asked about it, they would say that even though the disciples and their family were not talented enough, they just needed to focus on practicing martial arts. However, from the looks of it now, this person really had some capabilities. Chapter 277. On the second floor of a restaurant on Jingyang Avenue, near Beihang District, more than 10 young men and women were sitting around 2 tables. Have you heard that Her Majesty wants to open an educational institute? A tall and burly youth who was about 16 or 17 years old said while drinking at the table. Rinpoche is in charge, another youth casually said. The one who spoke was a beautiful young girl who was about 17 or 18 years old. She slammed her bowl on the table. The others looked at her and laughed mischievously, but they didn't restrain themselves. This young girl was called Lu Yueyao. She suffered a big loss during the Great Hunt and was verbally abused by Rinpoche. In the end, everyone had no choice but to stand up and target her. After that, she received 10 lashes and was grounded for a month as punishment. Originally, she wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge after she was released. However, after staying at home for a few days, she heard a piece of news that made her dumbstruck. That pretty boy who only knew how to talk was actually chosen as the Empress's future husband. She couldn't figure out what Her Majesty saw in that kid. Her Majesty wasn't only the Empress, but she was also the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Her beauty was enough to enchant countless people. However, such a person actually chose that kid as her husband. This almost made her smash everything in the room. As time went by, her hatred for Rinpoche didn't diminish at all. Instead, it intensified. Every time she heard news about Rinpoche, she would feel unhappy. However, the others didn't care much about her feelings. Instead, they chatted about the Educational Institute. What does an Educational Institute teach? This wasn't something that only one person wanted to know. Educational institutes were still new in Dayo.
It should be the same as Great Xia. They teach calligraphy, mathematics, military strategy, and law. Someone said with certainty. Maybe there's even Confucian classics. Someone laughed. That's hard to say, someone replied. Confucian classics was the general name for several doctrines that were passed down a long time ago. They mainly taught people to be kind, how to discipline themselves, and how to think about heaven and earth, society, and people and nature. It was the main doctrine in Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Chun Nation. However, the Aboriginals didn't like it, let alone the descendants of the officials. In Dayo, the fist was the hard truth. Although there were laws, in most people's hearts, fists were the most important. Everyone put this matter aside after discussing for a while. Besides practicing martial arts, these young people would at most read a few books at home. They would also call their friends to have fun outside and occasionally talk about the happenings in Lawn City. For example, the matter of the Black Star Academy. Everyone just casually talked about it, and no one took it too seriously. It was also impossible for them to enter any school. Everyone knew that only those who were not particularly talented would go. Ren Baqian was sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall with a list of names given to him by the Empress. On it were the names of the students who were sent by the court officials to enter the academy. Shurgan, don't tell me he's the grandson of the great elder? Ren Baqian casually asked when he saw the first name. It's his youngest son, the Empress said faintly. Pooh, great elder is indeed young at heart, despite his age, Ren Baqian exclaimed. The great elder should be at least 70 or 80 years old, right? It was written that Shurgan was 12 years old, which meant that the great elder was still having a son when he was 60 or 70 years old. Ren Baqian continued to read and immediately saw a familiar name. Tong Lan, 10 years old. This little girl's innate talent isn't good? Ren Baqian was shocked. She was only 10 years old, yet she kept telling him why flowers were so red and that her innate talent wasn't good. Tong Lan's innate talent is pretty good. At least it's better than her grandfather, the Empress said. Didn't they say that all the students are good-for-nothings with poor innate talent? Ren Baqian pointed at the name list and questioned. Tong Jinya said that since she's still young, she can stay in the academy for 2 years and consider it as finding a playmate. The Empress plucked a grape and threw it into her mouth. Ren Baqian was speechless. Do you think this is a kindergarten? However, after thinking about it, he had suffered so many losses in the hands of that girl and suffered so many beatings. This was a good opportunity for him to take revenge. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. As for the thought of letting her off because she was a delicious Lolita, Ren Baqian extinguished it before it could even form in his mind. If you don't take revenge, you're not a gentleman. A great man can't be ruthless. These were the words of the ancestor, and he couldn't forget them. Ren Baqian grinned and laughed. The Empress took another look at him and rolled her eyes. She could roughly guess what Ren Baqian was thinking at this moment. However, that girl Tong Lan was very crafty. At that time, it was uncertain who would be torturing who. Ren Baqian looked at the names on the list. There were a total of 31 people, which was about what he expected. He could only teach these disciples by himself. However, after thinking about it, Ren Baqian said, "Can you recruit a few from the commoners? They can stay in the academy as teachers in the future. After all, these are the children of the big shots in the imperial court. In the future, they would most likely become officials in various places. He couldn't possibly be the only one teaching them, right? All right." The Empress nodded her head. "But, have you thought of a name?" Lanxiang Academy. Ren Baqian looked serious. Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to twitch, Ren Baqian immediately changed his tune and said, "I'm joking. Actually, it's called New East." Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to emit a murderous aura, Ren Baqian changed his tune again and said, "Actually, this is also a joke. Let's call it Black Bamboo Academy. A few days ago, I saw a few purple bamboos in a small bamboo forest nearby." The Empress was more or less satisfied when she heard this name. She continued to eat her grapes and ignored Ren Baqian. "It's going to be New Year in a month, right? Are there any activities for New Year?" After that,
the Academy will start the enrollment?" Rinpoche asked. He still didn't know how to celebrate New Year in Dayo. "Yes, lantern grabbing," the Empress explained. "In the past, it was limited to young people below the age of 20, and the winners will be rewarded. If the others perform well, they will also be favored by the girls in the villages. If you want to participate, I can give you special permission to participate. If you perform well, I might even reward you," the Empress said with a smile on her face. "What rules?" Rinpoche was immediately excited. "First, build a frame and hang the lantern on it. The participants will be divided into groups of 10 and can choose their own people. The person who grabs the lantern first wins." The Empress's eyes were full of smiles. "Don't tell me I can fight against the others?" Rinpoche immediately laughed dryly. "Of course, this is the time to show off your skills," the Empress said as a matter of course. "Forget it then." Rinpoche immediately rejected her. He couldn't even beat a 10-year-old Lolita, so he would be courting death if he participated. "Don't you want to hear about my reward?" The Empress's tone carried a rare gentleness that made Rinpoche's heart flutter. However, he immediately shook his head like a rattle drum and said, "I'm a man, and I won't participate if I say I won't." Since the Empress had spoken like this, it definitely wasn't anything good. There was a huge pit ahead, and only a fool would jump into it. "I can give you a kiss." The Empress's voice was so soft that Rinpoche could hear her clearly. Upon hearing this, Rinpoche suddenly raised his head and looked at the Empress. Her face was flushed, and her shy look made Rinpoche feel as if there was a pile driver in his chest. Rinpoche put on a righteous face and said, "I feel that death is inevitable. It could be as heavy as Mount Tai or as light as a goose feather. I will die without regrets for your majesty." Then he changed the topic and said helplessly, "It's not that I'm unwilling to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest, but I've been afraid of heights since I was young and can't climb high. Therefore, even though I feel pain, I have no choice but to give up." Chapter 278. On a plane flying from Tokyo to Shanghai, Rinpoche looked at the Empress who had thrown a tantrum for a few days and sighed. "I think I'd better participate in the lantern-grabbing event. Even though I have a serious fear of heights, a real man has his limits." The Empress tilted her head, looked at him from the corner of her eyes, and then turned to look at the scenery outside. The Empress had been throwing a tantrum for a few days. She didn't say a word and only rolled her eyes when she saw him. She wasn't like the cold and aloof Empress at all. This was the first time such a situation had happened to the Empress. At first, he felt that the Empress was quite amusing, but after a long time, it wasn't so fun anymore. In fact, Rinpoche had some guesses in his heart. Could it be that the Empress had come to visit her? This was because the Empress would occasionally reveal such a feminine side, which was very different from her usual self. Other women had good tempers most of the time, but there would always be a few days a month when they were not normal and had a terrible temper. On the other hand, the Empress was cold and aloof most of the time. Every month, she would be abnormal and very feminine. The more Rinpoche thought about it, the more he felt that this possibility was not small. As the saying went, there must be something wrong with something abnormal. Rinpoche reached out and grabbed the Empress's hand. It was very soft and warm. He was relieved that he didn't feel the expected "pa," and the pain didn't come. These few days, he had also asked people about the lantern-grabbing event and more or less understood it. Just like what the Empress said, the lantern-grabbing event was divided into groups of 10. 9 of them were there to protect the commander. The participating groups could also attack other groups. Even though they couldn't be heavy-handed, there would be serious injuries every year. Fortunately, the Aboriginals had thick skin and flesh, so there wouldn't be any deaths. Also, both parties couldn't use weapons, but they could wear armor. Generally, it was leather armor. It wasn't very useful, but it had some protective effect. This gave Rinpoche some ideas. Since they could wear armor, was there a limit to leather or iron armor? He could make a full body armor with steel spikes and make himself look like a hedgehog. Who would dare to touch him then? When the time came, he just had to bump into the crowd. It was decided. When the plane landed, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand and walked out of the cabin. They froze like dogs. The two of them had just come back from Hawaii. They had changed planes in Japan and had specially bought 2 thick coats. However, it was still very cold when they came out. So cold, Rinpoche tightened his clothes with one hand and pulled the Empress's hand with the other. They followed the crowd and walked forward. But he was finally back. It had been almost half a year. When he escaped, it was the end of June and the beginning of July. Now, it was the last day of December. Tomorrow would be the new year. Mr. Rinpoche was stopped the moment he stepped out of the airport. The other party was a man in his 30s, and there was a man and a woman beside him. There's actually a plane to pick me up. This treatment is a little beyond the norm. Rinpoche laughed. It looks familiar. I think I've seen it before. Yes, I was even shot by Mr. Rin before, the other party said with a face full of hidden bitterness. It was just a joke. Don't be offended. Actually, I have a lot of respect for people like you who work for the country. Rinpoche immediately knew who it was. He laughed and directly brushed the matter aside. All three looked askance at him. Respect? Sorry, they really couldn't tell. Both of you, please. The three of them didn't say anything else. There were 2 cars waiting outside. Rinpoche and the Empress got into the car at the back while the middle-aged man sat in the front passenger seat. Rinpoche held the Empress's hand along the way. In any case, as long as there wasn't a pa, he wasn't prepared to let go and was prepared to hold her hand until next year. 2 hours later, the car entered the underground parking lot of the building and the few of them alighted. After entering the elevator, the Empress lowered her head and looked at the hand that Rinpoche was still holding. Pa! Rinpoche looked at his hand that was swollen like a pig's trotter and said seriously, "It's a little thicker and rounder than last time. I might have put on weight recently." The 3 of them looked askance at him and inexplicably felt that they had been showered with dog food. When they got out of the elevator, there were already people waiting outside. 5 or 6 men and women in suits were waiting at the entrance. The one in front said rather enthusiastically, "Mr. Rin, Madam Chi, you are finally back." Those who didn't know would think that the 2 of them had gone overseas to study. The other party was a newly established department with a huge research team behind them. They were prepared to study the things that Rinpoche had brought out. For the next half of the day, they discussed in detail about some cooperation matters. The previous time was just a preliminary agreement between both parties. This time, it was official. First of all, Rinpoche couldn't be as reckless as before. At least, he still had to abide by the country's laws. He couldn't be reckless just because of his special status. With regards to this, Rinpoche didn't have any objections. If no one provoked him, he wouldn't create trouble for no reason anyway. However, Rinpoche asked for the identities of the 2 secret departments, which was the department that Chinshur was in. In the future, it would be easier to deal with matters outside. At the very least, they could scare off a lot of trouble if they encountered any problems. Originally, the other party wanted to give Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao a nominal position in the army, but was rejected by Rinpoche. If that was the case, the 2 of them would be tied together. After that, they added some details about the cooperation. For example, if the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back were to be studied, how would they be distributed? Generally speaking, the country would take the majority. However, Rinpoche had the right to know. There was no reason for him to be kept in the dark about the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back. Furthermore, some of the research results could be converted into commercial applications. Both parties added some details in this area. For this matter, Rinpoche couldn't possibly ask a lawyer for help. It was entirely up to him. He didn't know if he would be at a disadvantage or benefiting from some aspects. After half a day, both parties understood some of the ideas of the other party and reached a partial agreement. In the end, Rinpoche felt that his brain was hurting. It was too troublesome to talk to these people because it was all about minor details. However, this was something that had to be done. If these things weren't explained clearly, who knew what certain people would do in the future? Especially after 10, 20, or 30 years, no one could say for sure what the current leaders would think. For most people, there wasn't a need to consider so much. However, for Rinpoche, 30 years on Earth was equivalent to 15 years.
Finally, both parties reached a memorandum of understanding. As for a contract, it was impossible to have one. The Empress sat there in a daze the entire time. She wasn't the least bit interested in such matters. After that, Rinpoche took out some things that he brought along. A bottle of soil, a bottle that contained an outstanding little white flower that he picked from the garden, and a piece of stone. These things looked ordinary, but they were the foundation of a world. From these things, it might be possible to see the differences between Earth and that world. The other party immediately arranged for people to keep these things. Mr. Ren, we need something more special. The person who spoke was Yang's son, the head of the newly established department called Messier 87. Messier 87 was a galaxy located in the constellation Virgo. This name also implied another world. From this, it could be seen that some people regarded the so-called paradise as a completely different world. After all, in the theory of Taoism, the paradise was located in the space of the big world. As a result, they had various kinds of connections with our world. At the same time, due to the relative isolation of their existence, the paradise had its own unique space-time structure. Therefore, the paradise could be said to be another world. However, Rinpoche felt that the person who came up with this name had probably seen too much Ultraman. Research always has to start from the basics. I also want to know what these basics are different from each other. I will bring some more things over a period of time, and some of them will be what you want, Rinpoche said. It's a pleasure working with you. The other party nodded. They also wanted to know what Rinpoche wanted to know. Since Rinpoche said that he would bring more things over a period of time, it was fine. You can contact me if there's anything. Yang's son handed a business card without a name to Rinpoche. I will try my best to help you settle some things within my capabilities. However, breaking the law doesn't count. That night, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand at the bund and looked at the 4D lights in the sky. The gorgeous colors shone on everyone. There were young people everywhere, and most of the cold wind was blocked by the people around them. As time passed, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more enthusiastic. 60 seconds, 59, 58. As the countdown began, this year had come to an end. Rinpoche held the Empress's hands at the right time and stood opposite her. 10, 9, 8. As the last 10 seconds passed, many couples around them shouted while holding hands or hugging each other. In the last few seconds, many people wanted to leave a kiss that crossed the new year. Rinpoche stared into the Empress's eyes and saw that her gaze was like the surface of a lake. Her face was slightly bashful. Rinpoche moved his mouth closer to hers when the last 3, 2, 1 resounded. This was such a good opportunity. What if the Empress was infected by this atmosphere? Rinpoche thought to himself. The Empress's body shrank back a little. Then, she subconsciously raised her hand and lightly hammered Rinpoche's chest. This action was very common on television, and the Empress had seen it many times. Chapter 279. How does it feel to have a girlfriend who is highly skilled in martial arts? Rinpoche did not know if anyone had considered this question, but he felt that he was qualified to answer. It was probably similar to dating a road roller. If you were not careful, you would be buried in the ground. This was risking your life to date. After a week, he finally got out of bed. He felt that he was going to have a psychological scar. However, he had to thank the super strong ointment from the other world. Now, he still remembered Yang Sen's surprised expression when he visited the hospital. He really could not imagine how he became like this. His sternum and 2 ribs were fractured, and it was similar to being hit by a car. However, at that time, Rinpoche was in the crowd at the bund. Thus, the only person who could cause harm to him was Qi Zixiao, who went in and out with him. After hearing the news, many people guessed whether Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao had a conflict and whether it would affect their cooperation. However, Qi Zixiao did not leave Rinpoche's bedside for the next few days with an apologetic look on her face, until someone raised the question of whether it was domestic violence. However, no one asked Rinpoche for confirmation. They only felt pity when they thought of him. Naturally, Rinpoche was embarrassed to say that he was bashfully punched in the chest by the Empress. However,
There was one thing that he understood. If he did not want to risk his life to get married and the Empress would become a widow, he had to improve his strength. However, the Empress's attitude was not right these few days. Although it was not very obvious, he could feel it. He also knew what the reason was. When he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, he saw the Empress in a daze. He did not know what she was thinking about, and there was a wine flask beside her. After seeing Ren Baqin, the Empress regained her original cold expression. However, there was some guilt in her eyes. It was very similar to the look she had when Ren Baqin received a concussion. Although she could control her strength most of the time, Ren Baqin was really too weak, especially when she could not maintain her calm. There were more and more emotions in her heart. If he wasn't paying attention, he might be seriously injured. Zixiao, Ren Baqin stepped forward and held the Empress's hand. The Empress retracted her hand slightly, and Ren Baqin grabbed it. People will get used to some things bit by bit, Ren Baqin said softly and held the Empress's hand in both of his palms. He secretly added in his heart, "This does not include being seriously injured. Don't worry too much. Many things will happen naturally. I'm afraid that one day, I'll have to personally bury you in the garden," the Empress said faintly. Her voice was a little cold, and the contents of her words were chilling. Ren Baqin knew that she was just feeling a little guilty, so there was a little resistance in her heart. She was afraid of hurting something. In other words, he was timid. The female Empress's heart was in a mess these few days. She did not know what she was feeling right now. In all these years, this was the first time she had felt this way. She was a little upset. It was the same feeling as before. This was the first time his heart was beating fast. The first time his heart felt like it was being pounded by an elephant. The first time he felt guilty. The first time he felt timid. "I trust that you will control your power." Looking at this hand, it was beautiful, soft, and warm. It made one want to hold it forever. Even though it's very powerful, it's not meant to harm anything. Ren Baqin held the Empress's hand and spoke in a very warm voice. The Empress allowed Ren Baqin to hold her hand, and her heart was beating very fast. Ren Baqin gently kissed the Empress's finger. As if she had been electrocuted, her whole body trembled slightly. The coldness that had just been restored immediately melted like ice and snow. Ren Baqin felt that the success rate of kissing her now was very high. However, there was a saying that went, "You won't die if you don't court death." Before reaching the man-will level, Ren Baqin felt that his small body would not be able to take a hit. It was better not to do anything too dangerous. "Don't think too much." Ren Baqin straightened his body and smiled. "We should set off now. A lot of people should be waiting anxiously." The Empress looked at him, wrinkled her nose slightly, and let out a soft humph. It sounded like a little girl raising her head proudly and making a sound. Ren Baqin knew that the Empress had recovered when he heard this sound. A few hours later, Ren Baqin and the Empress appeared in that building again. "Mr. Ren, you recovered very quickly." Yang Sun was a little surprised. It had only been half a month, but it seemed like there were no major problems. "Do you want to do a more detailed examination?" "No need." Ren Baqin waved his hand. "Don't try to trick me into letting you guys study me." Yang San felt a little regretful. At present, both parties were in the early stages of cooperation and were more cautious. "How's the previous one?" Ren Baqin asked. Soon after, he saw a stack of printed reports. Most of the composition is still the same, but there are many microorganisms that I have never seen before. Some of them died after leaving the soil, and some of them have undergone some changes. We need more time to find out more, Yang Sun explained briefly. However, the common iron and calcium content in the soil is very low, and the content of titanium and potassium is higher. It could be seen that Yang Sun was very concerned about the research progress in this area, and he almost blurted it out. Ren Baqin roughly glanced at the report and put it back on the table. "Let's go to the laboratory to take a look. You guys will be interested in the things that I brought this time." Ren Baqin was very confident because he had brought the elongation saber this time. After all, they had just started working together, and he had to bring something of great value. Although there were many valuable things in that world, for example, anything from the Kirin's body, such as the cloud crystal, which was also very precious in that world. However, after thinking about it, he still brought the elongation saber over. The elongation saber's characteristics were great enough. Whether it was growth or mental control, it was enough to shock everyone. This thing wasn't very useful in his hands, but in the hands of a nation, it could be used to research a lot of valuable things. At the same time, he also wanted to know if this saber still hid any secrets. However, he didn't have the conditions or the time to experiment. He might as well bring it over. Perhaps there would be some additional gains during the research process. When Yang Sun heard what Rinpoche said, a trace of joy appeared on his face. The things that Rinpoche brought over previously were indeed slightly different from those on Earth, but their current value wasn't considered high. One had to know that Earth was a paradise. How could some things like soil be able to satisfy people? Accompanied by Yang Sun and 2 guards, the 2 of them entered the elevator and went all the way down to the basement. There were a few floors above this building, and they were the exposed parts. The important places were in the 3 floors below ground level. After exiting the elevator and passing through 2 doors, they were greeted by a vast expanse of green. It was as if they had suddenly arrived in a forest, and above them was a blue sky. Rinpoche could tell that something wasn't right at first glance. He stretched out his hand to touch it and realized that it was actually a wall. The forest was fake, and presumably, the sky above them was also fake. The Empress also touched it and didn't care anymore. She thought that the surroundings were made of glass. This is a new technology that hasn't been applied in the commercial market yet, Yang Sun said simply. Subsequently, they came to a laboratory that was filled with tempered glass partitions, various instruments, and computers. It was similar to what Rinpoche had imagined. After taking a look around, Rinpoche had a better understanding of the laboratory. At present, there were thousands of talents in this laboratory, and they could carry out multiple projects at the same time. There were also thousands of supporting staff, including guards, kitchen staff, and assistants. At present, it was one of the more advanced laboratories in the country. Most of the previous projects had already been completed, and they were ready to fully focus on the things that Rinpoche had brought over from the paradise. However, at present, they could only study some soil, a small flower, and a piece of rock. Most of them were idle. Very soon, Rinpoche met the person in charge of the laboratory. He was a white-haired old man who immediately asked Yang Sun, "What did you bring this time?" "This is Elder Lu. He has done considerable research in biology and is one of the people in charge of this laboratory," Yang Sun introduced. "These 2 are Mr. Run and Madam Chi. Mr. Run has brought some things. The 2 of you are here for a checkup." Elder Lu's eyes lit up when he heard Yang Sun's words. "This time, I'm here to study something else." Rinpoche shook his head slightly, and a sheathed knife appeared in his hand. "What's this?" Elder Lu stared at the knife and asked. Yang Sun immediately thought of some legendary magic treasures and the like. Rinpoche drew the knife from the sheath, and before the 2 of them could see, he made a cut on his hand and let the blood drip onto the knife. After making a few cuts, it wouldn't hurt anymore. With a thought from Rinpoche, the knife in his hand suddenly grew from 1 foot to 2 feet. This shocked the 2 of them and almost made them think that it was a switchblade, following which it became a 3-foot blade that completely grew out of the handle. This time, Yang Sun's eyes immediately lit up. Rinpoche took out some ointment and applied it on his arm. In the blink of an eye, the wound began to close and tender flesh began to grow. This knife is called Changsheng. You have seen its function. It can grow after sucking blood, Rinpoche told the 2 of them. Elder Lu stared at Rinpoche's arm and asked, "What medicine is this?" "Black mud cream. I have a laboratory that is researching this, and it will be on the market soon," Rinpoche said faintly. Even so, Elder Lu was still very interested. Following which, he set his sights on the long knife in Rinpoche's hand and asked, "It can grow only by sucking blood? Can it become shorter?" With a move from Rinpoche, the Changsheng knife returned to its original size of 2 feet. It can be controlled with your mind. Furthermore, as time passes, the length will slowly return to its original size.
This thing can be controlled with your mind? Elder Lu was suddenly shocked. Upon hearing this, Yang Sin's eyes lit up like a searchlight, and his breathing became heavier. Yes, Ren Baqian briefly explained the situation of this Chongqing knife. Let me try, Elder Lu said. First of all, this knife could grow. The metal that could grow already proved its value. Although Ren Baqian said that it could absorb blood, the quality of the blood that flowed from Ren Baqian and the part that grew from the knife was too different. It completely didn't conform to the law of conservation of mass. Needless to say, it could be controlled with one's mind. If the theory was researched, it would have a huge impact on the modern world. To put it simply, it could drive with a single thought and stop with a single thought. Or to put it another way, it could be controlled with one's mind. The thoughts in one's mind could be input into the computer. Or, to put it in another way, the so-called virtual world technology. There are also other aspects. Chapter 280. Elder Lu took the elongation saber and held his breath for a long time before asking in surprise, "Why isn't there any reaction? How can this be?" Ren Baqian took the elongation saber back to his hand. It could grow or shrink according to his will, advance or retreat. Let me try. Yang Sun took it and held his breath for a long time while repeating, "Grow, grow." However, there was still no reaction after a long time. This time, everyone's gaze was somewhat strange. Ren Baqian pondered whether it could only be used by people from another world. However, he was an earthling. He stuffed the elongation saber back into the Empress's hand to see if there were any changes. After a few seconds, the Empress raised her hand and threw the saber back to him. "Only you can use it. This thing has the ability to recognize its owner." Ren Baqian was flabbergasted as he didn't expect this at all. Not only was Ren Baqian surprised, but everyone else was also surprised. What did it mean for it to recognize its owner? Was this saber compatible with Ren Baqian in some way? Or did this saber have its own thoughts? The former was like a key opening a lock. So how did Ren Baqian control the saber? As for the latter, was this saber alive? It seems like I'm the only one who can use this saber. I'll bring back the things you need in a few days. Ren Baqian sheathed the saber. Although this saber was a little useless, he still felt that it was pretty good that only he could use it. Leave this saber here first. We still need to conduct some tests. Elder Lu quickly grabbed Ren Baqian's arm. Although only Ren Baqian could use it, this saber had great research value. Ren Baqian thought for a while and decided to let them study this saber to see if there were any secrets. "Don't break it, or else you won't get anything else," Ren Baqian exhorted. Elder Lu held the saber and ran out to call for the researchers. He couldn't be bothered with Ren Baqian, who was left behind. His main goal now was to study the secrets of this saber. After leaving the saber here for the time being, Ren Baqian left with the Empress and returned to the haunted house in SY, where several people died. At least, most people in that building thought that house was a haunted house. When Ren Baqian appeared in that neighborhood, a few people were stunned at first, then their expressions changed drastically. They quickly called the police after Ren Baqian left. "Hello, 110? I saw the wanted murderer." A few policemen were stopped just as they were about to set off. After all, Ren Baqian's arrest warrant had already been revoked. However, these police officers had a deep impression of his case, especially that note. As soon as he heard the news, he was immediately furious and wanted to arrest him. Only after the reminder did he remember that the man was no longer a wanted criminal. Until now, many people did not understand. The case that person committed was almost irrefutable, and the impact was so big, so bad. How could the arrest warrant be canceled? Take a look. The person who stopped them earlier threw over a piece of paper. On it was a notice of what had happened. In the notice, Ren Baqian became a member of a certain secret department, and the Jean family was involved in a series of cases. In fact, there was no need to issue this notice, but they were afraid that someone would cause trouble for Ren Baqian again. Based on what Ren Baqian had done in the past, he might not be able to stir up any trouble in the end. He might as well notify them. As long as he doesn't break the law in the future, don't bother with him, the policeman reiterated.
Renbachian stood in front of the door and looked at the newly changed lock and the key in his hand. He was slightly speechless, as he couldn't even return to his own home. After calling Chen Shi and asking where the key to the new lock was, Renbachian opened the door. There was dust everywhere, and the living room was filled with shopping bags. All of them were bought in Milan previously. There was a layer of cloth covering them, and it looked like his bed sheets. He called the housekeeper, and the housekeeper was surprised to receive the call. Renbachian explained that he wasn't a wanted criminal, that it was a misunderstanding, and that he was actually a government employee. The housekeeper immediately promised to arrange for someone to clean up the house and bring a new contract. The Empress stood there and frowned slightly. As she flicked her sleeves, the dust in the living room seemed to be blown away by a storm. In an instant, nobody could see her. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the Empress instantly appeared outside the door, leaving Renbachian to be baptized by the dust storm. Cough, cough. Renbachian covered his nose with one hand and looked as if he had just crawled out from a pile of coal. He turned his head and looked at the Empress. The Empress looked back at him with an innocent look on her face. After waiting for an hour, the person who promised to come immediately finally arrived. At this moment, the house was even dirtier than before. The walls and ceiling were covered in dust. As long as one raised their voice, the dust would fall from the top of their heads. After more than half an hour, Renbachian, who had taken a bath and changed his clothes, dragged the Empress to the supermarket to buy ingredients, sweets, and wine. What's the matter? Renbachian looked at a young lady who suddenly blocked his way and asked. She was 27 or 28 years old, wearing a police coat, and had her hair tied into a ponytail. She looked very neat. The lady took out an identification card from her pocket and said, "Police, I'm just warning you not to offend me. Don't think that what you have done is over. If you think that I have done something wrong, you can arrest me." Renbachian stretched out both of his hands and smiled. He took a glance at the identification card, and it seemed that the person was called Lin Mu. However, my arrest warrant has already been canceled, right? The others didn't come, and only you came. If it isn't because you have a strong sense of justice, then what relationship do you have with the Jean family? I can tell you that one of them was my aunt. What did she do? She had never hurt anyone, but she died in the hands of a murderer like you. Lin Mu gnashed his teeth and said, "The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. This was left behind by you, right? You are a murderer. You should be executed. Although I don't know what kind of background you have to cancel your arrest warrant, it doesn't mean that the previous incident is over. The Jean family has done so many things. Why didn't you arrest them? What wrong did the people who were killed by the Jean family do?" Renbachian revealed a sarcastic smile. "You seem to have a strong sense of justice, but in fact, you bully the weak and fear the strong. You might even be able to become a police officer because of your relationship with the Jean family. Therefore, why would you bother about them? In that case, do you want to take revenge now?" Speaking up to this point, Renbachian slightly bent his body so that he could look straight into Lin Mu's eyes. He then said softly, "Take a guess. If you die, will anyone avenge you?" Lin Mu was so angry that his whole body trembled. "Do you really think that you can do whatever you want? You are threatening the police. Be careful, or I will arrest you now." Renbachian nodded seriously. "Yes, I can really do whatever I want." "You." As soon as Renbachian's voice fell, he laughed. It was meaningless to provoke this self-righteous and crazy woman. He also didn't think that he could really do whatever he wanted. He was just provoking her a little. "It seems like you're the one who is threatening me, right? I forgot to mention that I am civil servant, but you are not qualified to know my specific identity. What I do is a national secret. As for the previous question, you should ask the Jean family when they are still around. Can you really do whatever you want with money and power? I believe they will give you an answer." Renbachian smiled, turned around, and pulled the Empress. They walked past the woman, leaving her gritting her teeth and standing in the same place. "You are very boring." The Empress was slightly dissatisfied. She actually wasted so much time on someone unrelated to her. I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Moreover, I hate such self-righteous people. Chapter 281. Renbachian didn't take the policewoman seriously,
But after seeing her, Rinpoche recalled the aftermath of the Jin family. After returning to the car, he gave Chinshur a call, as he should be more familiar with the situation. After asking, he found out that the Jin family was in a mess after he escaped. Several of the main leaders were dead, and there were almost no immediate family members left. The remaining people fought fiercely for the property, especially the relatives of the Jin family. At that time, some people thought of avenging Jin 1 and the rest, but before they had the chance, the police exterminated the remaining members of the Jin family and dug up all the previous incidents. After all, the Jin family wasn't clean, and this incident was so serious that the old scores were immediately dug up. Of course, there were also some departments behind the scenes. After the call, Rinpoche felt relieved and completely let go of this matter. The Jin family had already fallen apart and could no longer cause any trouble. For the next period of time, Rinpoche had absolutely nothing to do. Occasionally, he would go to the school that was still under construction. The 3 brick houses had basically been completed. Sometimes Rinpoche would think of something and ask the person in charge to add a little something in a certain place. For example, a swing. For example, digging a ditch to bring in water from a nearby stream. For example, building a pavilion. The rest of the time, he would practice or receive Tonglan's one-on-one tutoring. Every time he lay on the ground after being educated by Tonglan, he would always remember a man saying, "I'm invincible in my background music." However, Rinpoche was exactly the opposite of him. "I've never wanted my background music." What a painful realization. Traveling back and forth between the other world and Earth, his progress was still slow, but his strength had recently increased to more than 450 kilograms. At this time, Rinpoche couldn't see the surrounding scenery clearly at the bottom of the lake, but he estimated that he shouldn't be far from the bottom. When he touched the bottom of the lake, he would have completed the cultivation of the visualization of water and reached the initial stage of the man-will level. This was a qualitative change. When he reached the initial stage of the man-will level, his entire body would undergo some changes, indicating that he had taken an important step. In Great Xia, only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could reach the man-will level, and only 1 in 100 could reach the earth-will level. From this ratio, some problems could be explained. The man-will level was an extremely important threshold. Early in the morning, Rinpoche cleaned himself up and shaved his hair, revealing his green scalp. He also shaved his beard. He even took a cold shower. Then he picked up Gun, who was hugging his thigh, and threw it to the side, causing it to collide with Tian. Tian and Gun were sent to Pingle Park recently. Otherwise, Rinpoche would have missed them. He simply informed the Empress and got someone to send them over. When he arrived at Yangxing Palace Hall, the Empress was reading a thread-bound book. "Your Majesty, do you want to return with me? Have a taste of our new year and home-cooked meals." Rinpoche stood beside her, leaned his upper body against the wooden couch, and moved closer to see what the Empress was looking at. "Are you going home?" The Empress straightened her body and asked. She then casually slapped the book on his body. "Yes." Rinpoche nodded. It was time to go back. It had been so long. If not for the fact that the Empress was always by his side, he would have returned long ago. "I'm not going." The Empress immediately rejected him. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief after hearing what the Empress said. After all, even though the Empress treated him well, she was still very cold to others. In addition, she had been in charge of life and death for a long time. Furthermore, she had the aura of a top-notch expert. Ordinary people would probably feel uneasy around her. Just by releasing a little bit of her aura, a vacuum zone would appear around her, and no one would appear around her. If he really brought the Empress back, he was afraid that there would be an awkward silence, and then an awkward silence. Therefore, Rinpoche felt that this wasn't a good time. However, it was still up to the Empress to decide whether to go or not. It seemed like the Empress didn't want to see anyone else now. The solar furnace should have arrived at Mount Damo by now, right? Rinpoche calculated that it had already been half a month. Even though it was a mirror type and had to be transported carefully, it should have arrived in half a month. According to the journey, it should have arrived yesterday, the Empress said. She had received the news previously. If they used the Yabbard to send the letter, they should have received it by today. After all, not only Rinpoche and the Empress were concerned about this matter, but many people in the imperial court were also paying attention to it. This was a major event that could affect the entire Dayo. The people from the Ministry of Works, Ministry of Revenue, and Ministry of War were also waiting for the news. On Mount Damo, dozens of people were busy fixing concave mirrors on a huge shelf. A group of people surrounded them and watched the show from afar. This thing can melt Mount Damo. Gu Qiong, the supervisor of the iron mine at Mount Damo, and many of his subordinates looked at them busily. When he recalled what these people said last night, he was still in disbelief. You will know in a while. The person who spoke was Tao Jiyuan from the Department of Ordnance. He followed them this time around. Regarding this solar furnace, he had naturally heard of it. Those who saw it with their own eyes that day often talked about it. He had also heard Feng Ho talk about it. He heard that it used the energy of the sun to melt steel. However, he wasn't very clear about the specifics. Following the busy craftsman, the mirrors were fixed on the shelf one by one, just like a jigsaw puzzle. After spending the entire morning, the mirrors on the shelf were finally installed. Dozens of people took out some flat mirrors and began to adjust the angles. Finally, all the mirrors reflected the sunlight onto the solar furnace, and then onto an area with a radius of 0.5 meter on Mount Damo. Everyone focused their attention there, wanting to see what would happen. In less than a minute or two, they could see the mountains start to turn red, smoke, and then catch fire. 3 minutes later, the molten iron started to melt and flowed down the mountain wall. It's done. The person who cheered was the leader of the craftsmen. His name was Peng Zhe, following which the other craftsmen also cheered. After working for such a long time, there were finally no problems. On the other hand, the others were dumbfounded as they looked at the molten iron flowing down Mount Damo. They actually did it. Previously, the method of burning the mountain could increase the output of the iron mine by several times. With this thing, it wasn't just a few times, but more than 10 times or even 100 times. Following which, the craftsmen prepared to install the second solar furnace. This time around, they brought enough concave mirrors to make 3 of these solar furnaces. At the same time, someone taught Gu Qiong how to adjust the angle of the mirrors and the angle of the shelf. This was taught by Rinpoche. After all, they couldn't just melt a single point. At the same time, there was also a metal box that was specially used to collect the molten iron. All they had to do was place it at the bottom. When the molten iron fell into the metal box, it would heat up the metal box, but it wouldn't melt. After all, the molten iron would cool down as it fell. Some of the molten iron would cool down and form wall hangings on the mountain wall. As for these newly formed wall hangings, as long as a hammer was used to smash them, they would fall. After 2 hours, the molten iron that flowed down and the iron pieces that fell and solidified on the mountain wall weighed about 500 kilograms. A solar furnace could be used for about 6 hours a day. At other times, due to the angle of the sun, the sunlight couldn't be reflected onto Mount Damo through the mirrors and the solar furnace. However, in just 3 hours, 1,500 kilograms of iron could be produced. 3 solar furnaces would be equivalent to 9,000 kilograms of iron. Excluding the rainy days, there would be at least 200 sunny days in a year. That was to say, Tao Yuan sat on the ground without a care for his image. He didn't have enough fingers to count and couldn't calculate for a long time. 8 million kilograms. When Tao Jiyuan finally came up with this number, his lips were trembling. This number really scared him. When the others heard it, they also started to tremble. Gu Qiong's face was flushed as if he had drunk too much. One had to know that Dayo's annual production of iron was only about 5,000 kilograms. Now, with this solar furnace, the annual production of iron was equivalent to 100 years of iron production from Mount Damo and Mount Liuzui. This number was simply too terrifying. Furthermore, as long as there were enough manpower and solar energy, this number would continue to increase. Based on the production of a saber that weighed 20 kilograms, close to 100,000 sabers could be produced in a year. One had to know that for so many years, Dayo didn't have a 100,000 strong army. One of the main reasons was the lack of weapons. Among the commoners, a short saber could be regarded as a family heirloom. When this news reached the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of War, and the Ministry of Revenue, these few departments were about to explode. The loud noise could even be heard on the streets outside. Tong Jinye and Qin Chuan's wild laughter lasted for the time it took to burn a joss stick. Even though they had seen Ren Baqin demonstrate the solar furnace, they didn't expect it to be so effective. That night, Tong Jinye from the Ministry of Works and Qin Chuan from the Ministry of War invited their subordinates to a banquet at House Yunyan. In the end, it turned into a decisive battle at the summit of a brothel. Tong Jinye had the last laugh again. When the Empress received this news, she was a little dazed at first. Soon after, she revealed a look of joy. At this rate, they could produce 200,000 weapons in 2 years. They didn't even need that many weapons. As long as they could produce 50,000 weapons, Dayo would have an additional 50,000 strong soldiers. 30,000 of them would be transferred to the Protectorate of the North, and the remaining 20,000 to the Protectorate of the Southeast and Protectorate of the Northeast. At that time, even if Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Chen Nation launched an attack together, she wouldn't need to worry. The Empress was excited. She stood up and walked a few steps in the hall. However, she remembered that the person who could share this joy with her wasn't here at this moment. At this moment, Ren Baqin didn't know about this. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't be as happy as the others. An annual production of 1.8 million kilograms was only 1,800 tons, which was about the same as the annual steel production of the Tang dynasty. One had to know that the annual steel production of China on Earth was 1 billion tons. 1,800 tons wasn't even enough to meet the steel consumption of a small city. However, this was already a huge improvement for Dayo. At the very least, in terms of weapons, they would have sufficient stocks and wouldn't be controlled by others anymore. Chapter 282. Ren Baqin parked his car in the neighborhood and stared blankly for a long time. It was impossible for one to be afraid of homesickness. However, after escaping and coming back, there were still some feelings. At this time, there were many children setting off firecrackers. There were also people pasting couplets and hanging lanterns. Although the atmosphere of the new year had been fading over the years, the atmosphere in this neighborhood was still quite strong, perhaps because there were many old people. Not long after, Ren Baqin's cell phone rang. Just as he answered the call, he heard his father shouting, "Why are you still in a daze? Is your girlfriend here?" Ren Baqin's parents were extremely concerned about the woman who was by his side, even when he was on the run. No, Ren Baqin had only said one word when he was interrupted by his father. "In that case, quickly come up and help me paste the couplets." Ren Baqin looked up and saw a figure flash past the window. It seemed that his father had been waiting there all along. Ren Baqin got out of the car, took out his things, and carried them upstairs. Before he could knock, his father opened the door and stood up to let him in. Mama Ren hurriedly came over and sized him up. "You have become much darker. Did you suffer much?" Speaking of suffering, Ren Baqin was full of bitter tears. He felt that he had suffered a lot. For example, he was beaten up by the little lowly with one hand, beaten up by the little lowly with both hands, and beaten up by the little lowly. In any case, he was beaten up once every 2 days. In addition, he would occasionally get punched in the chest by the Empress's small fists, which seriously injured him. It was indeed bitter. At present, Ren Baqin was almost certain that his first serious injury was also caused by the Empress. It was just that he couldn't figure out why. As for the darkness, it would be strange if the sun in Dayo wasn't scorching hot. Putting down the things, he spread his hands and said, "Look at my face. Do I look like I suffered? It's mainly because I've been sightseeing in Europe, so it's a good opportunity to go out and see the scenery outside." "You have gained a lot of weight. How many kilograms are you now?" Papa Ren asked casually after sizing him up. 160. Recently, Ren Baqin's physique had been going up in a straight line. He looked fine wearing thick clothes now, but after taking them off, his entire body was full of muscles. "In the past, I ate every day at home and didn't gain weight. Now that I've gone out for a walk,
I've gained weight. Mama Ren complained about how Rinpoche didn't gain weight at home, but gained weight after going out for a walk. There's a lot of junk food in Europe and America, and there are all kinds of high-calorie foods. Fortunately, I've been training every day recently, otherwise I wouldn't be like this. You still have the cheek to talk about training. You still have a mood to train? Do you know how worried we were? As Mama Rin spoke, she poked Rinpoche's forehead with her one yang finger. I'm helping the country with some things. Rinpoche added, I'm a civil servant now. Rinpoche and Rinpoche were surprised. I can be considered a staff member of a certain department. There's no danger, and I'm in charge of some simple tasks, Rinpoche said. What about your business? It doesn't matter. This civil servant is actually a part-time job. It's just an identity. There is such a thing. Papa Run and Mama Rin felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. In many places, people would fight to become civil servants. How could Rinpoche still have a part-time job? I brought something back for you this time. Rinpoche opened his bag and took out a wooden box. This is a product that our company is going to launch soon. It's called Black Jade Reconnection Ointment. If you suffer from external injuries, just apply a little of it and you'll be healed immediately. Bah! Mama Rin spat. I've also read Jean Yang's new works. Kid, your words are getting more and more out of hand. Rinpoche thought about it and decided not to tell his mother that Jean Yang and Jean Yongxin were two different people. Speaking of which, Jean Yongxin was also quite amazing. As long as he wrote a book, it would be written by Jean Yang. The name of the medicine hasn't been decided yet, but the effect is real. As for external injuries, just apply this on them, and they won't even leave a scar. Keep it well. Rinpoche placed the small box on the table. The rest are clothes for you and your parents. Try them on when you have time. Aren't we going to put up couplets? Work first. Where did Wanyan go? Rinpoche asked curiously. Why wasn't Wanyan home on New Year's Eve? He seems to have gotten a girlfriend. She's his high school classmate. I reckon that they are already together, Mama Run said somewhat discontentedly. In her opinion, it was still too early for a freshman to fall in love. Not bad. Otherwise, all the good cabbages would have been eaten by pigs. Rinpoche nodded. Then he suffered another blow from the six-pulse divine sword. If you didn't mention it, I almost forgot to ask. What's the name of your girlfriend? Where did he come from? You didn't invite her? Mama Ren's face immediately lit up. I'm from another city, and I'm celebrating the new year. Rinpoche waved his hand. What's her name? What's her job? Why was she around when you were in Europe? Mama Rin still wouldn't let him off. Her surname is Qi, and her name is Zixiao. She's a civil servant and is considered my superior. Don't I have a part-time job? That's it. Rinpoche managed to deal with all his mother's questions with great difficulty and went to the corridor with his father to put up couplets and the word fu. It was past 2 in the afternoon when Rinpoche returned. Rinpoche was sitting on the sofa and chatting with his father. He was talking about his experiences in Europe and, of course, omitted many inappropriate things for children. For example, he made a lot of sakama that was drenched in ketchup. According to him, this trip was basically a sightseeing tour. Of course, the truth was almost the same. During dinner, Papa Run and Mama Rin asked a bunch of questions about his girlfriend, such as her birth date, family situation, and so on. This made Rinpoche's head hurt. 8 characters of birth. How could there be 8 characters of birth in that world? His grandfather was the founding emperor and was obsessed with cultivation. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. His father was the late emperor who was obsessed with cultivation and went missing after getting seriously injured. Could he say this? Would you believe if I said it? The family celebrated the new year together. The next day, Rinpoche started to walk the streets and visit his relatives and friends. After his accident, his relatives were really nice. Nothing melodramatic happened. Instead, they helped Papa Rin and Mama Run gather a lot of information. It was reasonable for Rinpoche to visit them and mention his identity as a civil servant at the same time. This made his family feel that he was similar to 007. After all, he carried the lives of more than 10 people and returned half a year later, as if nothing had happened. This made it hard for people to doubt his words.
For ordinary people, Rinpoche was considered a legend. Rinpoche didn't comment on this. If he revealed his girlfriend, he could engrave the word legend on his forehead. He didn't need to reveal it because Mama Run helped him reveal it. Now that Rinpoche was successful in his business and had become a civil servant with 5 insurances and 1 housing fund, there were many people who wanted to introduce him to a marriage partner. Mama Run then showed the photo that he had posted on his WeChat moments to everyone, but there was no response. Brother, Rin Wanyan sneaked up to Rinpoche. Sister-in-law, do you have a younger sister? No, get lost. Rinpoche slapped the back of his head. Chapter 283. Rinpoche stayed at home for a few days, enjoyed his family's affection, and received all kinds of gazes. Then, he returned to Dayo. After changing his clothes, Rinpoche carried a bag to Yangshin Palace Hall. The bag contained the dumplings, braised pork, and eggplant boxes that Rinpoche's mother gave him. The Empress was curled up on the sofa watching Qin Yunji with a tomato-flavored potato chip in her hand. Seeing that Rinpoche had returned, the Empress glanced at him indifferently, ignored him, and focused on watching the television series. Your Majesty, I brought you some dumplings. They were made at home, and I insisted on bringing them to you. Rinpoche lifted the bag in his hand. He took a look behind the Empress, pointed at the main character on the screen, and said, I always felt that men look ugly like this, and they're almost the same as women. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche, looked at the gigolo on the screen, and ignored him, although the one in the television series was indeed similar to a woman. However, Rinpoche wasn't much better. He was just a little stronger now. When Rinpoche first arrived, he was also thin and weak. His waist wasn't even as thick as a human's arm. As for his appearance, there was no need to talk about it. Mount Damo has installed solar furnaces. With 3 solar furnaces, they can produce 3,000 kilograms of iron a day. The Empress thought for a while and told Rinpoche this good news. Even though a day had passed, she still felt happy, and Rinpoche was the one who could share this joy with her. Did a good job. Rinpoche's face revealed a happy expression. Although it was much worse than the modern world, it was already a good start with Dayo's foundation. With the remaining iron, he could also make other things. For example, steam engines. Rinpoche and the Empress curled up on the sofa, each sitting at one end. Their actions were surprisingly identical, and they were hugging their legs. The Empress realized that he was copying her, so she quietly picked up a potato chip and threw it at his face. After being seriously injured previously, the two of them consciously kept some distance between each other. Rinpoche was really too weak to be hurt. A light blow could seriously injure him. He was no different from tofu residue. However, this kind of small action was much more natural. Both of them felt that it was pretty good. From the next day onwards, Rinpoche resumed his normal life, practicing martial arts, getting beaten up, and at the same time, preparing to teach the students. After all, the day was approaching. In another 3 weeks, Dayo's new year would be over, and it would be time for the students to report for duty. While preparing the teaching materials, Rinpoche realized that being a teacher wasn't an easy task. The students in Dayo were different from when he was young. At that time, he had no other choice. Everyone else also learned the same things and went through layers of examinations to enter university. Furthermore, these things were still new to Dayo. They needed to be interesting and attractive to Dayo in order to do so. For the time being, Rinpoche's courses were Chinese, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Among them, language was still easy. The main thing was literacy. Simplified Chinese characters. He was ready to spread simplified Chinese characters to this world. Mathematics was a necessity. Adding and subtracting with less than 2 digits required one to break one's fingers. Anything with more than 2 digits required one to guess. This was a common situation among the Aboriginal commoners. The officials were not much better off. They could do simple addition and subtraction, but if it was slightly more complicated, they would have to scratch their heads. Only the people from the Ministry of Revenue had mastered the multiplication and division of 2-digit numbers.
There's almost no foundation in physical chemistry in this world. For example, when you hit a rock, your fist would hurt. Everyone knew this. If one were to ask why, it was simply nonsense. After all, a rock was harder than a fist. These were all reasons that should be taken for granted. He had not even considered the deeper effects of power, let alone others. If they wanted to build Dayo into a well-off imperialist society with Dayo's characteristics, it would not be possible without these foundations. No matter how strong one was, he could only destroy and not use it to build. Except for brick moving. Dayo had tens of millions of god-level brick-moving workers who could carry hundreds of kilograms of bricks as if they were flying. At this moment, Ren Baqien was surrounded by darkness. He could only see a little bit of light when he raised his head. He was completely surrounded by water. The huge pressure almost needed Ren Baqien together. Every inch of his body was under tremendous pressure. The last bit of air in his lungs was squeezed out. Ren Baqien knew that he was going back soon. However, he still tried his best to dive down, even if it was just a little bit. At this moment, his fingertips seemed to have touched something, causing his body to tremble. The lake was dead silent. There wasn't even a single water plant. It had been a few months since he touched something in the water. Could it be that I have touched the bottom of the lake? Ren Baqien was ecstatic. Did touching the bottom of the lake mean that he had finally reached the threshold of the man will level? However, his strength had also dissipated. His vision started to turn black. Soon after, he returned to the real world and felt extremely tired. After waking up, Ren Baqien felt his body and didn't seem to have changed much. At this moment, his strength was about 250 kilograms, which was achieved bit by bit during this period of time. Other than that, his strength and speed didn't change much from yesterday. Have I reached the man-wheel level? Ren Baqien wasn't too sure. He went out of the house and asked someone to prepare a medicinal bath. After soaking in the medicinal bath, he was still pondering. The man-wheel level was a barrier, and there should be some changes after he passed it. It seemed that he hadn't reached the man-wheel level yet. In that case, he would have to wait until he practiced at night. After soaking in the medicinal bath, Ren Baqien left the palace with the guards and went straight to the glass factory. At this time, the end of the year was approaching, and there were a lot more people in Lan City. Many men and women wearing animal skins bought some salt, cloth, and other things in Lan City and brought them back to the village. They also brought a lot of furs and other things when they went down the mountain. Many of them simply tied up the wild beasts and carried them over. Ren Baqien saw a sharp-toothed tiger tied up and hung on a tree trunk. Two people carried it, one in front and one behind, into the city. In addition, there were many other things, such as strange horns, birds in cages, and other things that Ren Baqien had never seen before. They could only be found deep in the mountains. Ren Baqien brought the ox rider and ran all the way to the glass factory. Under Jiao's lead, they entered a house. Inside, there were neatly stacked wooden boxes that emitted a fragrant smell of wood. He went forward and opened one of the boxes. Inside, there were crystal-clear glass cups. Every 2 cups were filled with hay to prevent them from being damaged during transportation. Ren Baqien was used to seeing glass products and didn't think much of it. However, when Jiaozhuo looked at these cups, his face was filled with pride. These were made by him and those craftsmen. After that, Ren Baqien went to the side and opened another box. Inside, there were many vertical silver mirrors. They were basically round and inlaid in a wooden disc. Ren Baqien examined them carefully and nodded his head in satisfaction. These were the goods that would be sent to the other 3 countries after a period of time. At present, if the gold, silver, and gemstones in the palace's treasury were exchanged for medicine, they could support him for 3 months at most, although there would be a batch of gold and silver being sent to the palace at the end of the year. However, these gold and silver were the expenses of the palace next year, including the salaries of the palace guards, palace maids, the imperial concubines, and the daily expenses of the Empress. Therefore, what Ren Baqien needed for his future training would depend on this batch of goods. At this time, it was close to the new year. The 2 caravans that belonged to the imperial family had already returned.
When they left after the new year, they would bring these goods to the other countries and let them spit out some of the profits that they had previously earned in Dayo. The craftsmen will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver each. The apprentices and handymen will be rewarded with 3 taels each, and you will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. You will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. I will get someone to send the money over later. Everyone will have a fat new year, Rinpoche said faintly as he closed the box and left. Sir is wise. It is our fortune to be able to work under you, Jiaozhua quickly said. Chapter 284. That night, Rinpoche entered the visualization of water again. It was still a lifeless lake with a faint mist and a few small trees. Rinpoche couldn't wait and dived into the lake. He swam to the center of the lake and dived down. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. The water pressure was getting stronger, and the surrounding optical fibers were getting dimmer and dimmer. However, Rinpoche's condition today was better than yesterday. His heart was burning with passion. When his fingers touched the object below again, there was still a little bit of air left in Rinpoche's lungs. According to his experience, he could hold on for another 10 seconds or so. These days, he was very familiar with the condition of his body when he dived down. Due to the lack of oxygen in his lungs, Rinpoche started to feel a burning pain. He focused all his attention on his hands and touched his surroundings. It wasn't mud as he expected, but a stone-like bottom. At the same time, one of his hands touched something protruding out. When he wanted to carefully identify what it was, he suddenly woke up and felt tired all over. What a pity, just a little bit more, Rinpoche thought. But just a little bit more. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Rinpoche waved his fist, but he didn't have any energy and went straight to sleep. The next day, Rinpoche dived to the bottom of the lake again to look for the object he touched last night. This time, he finally touched it. It was something that looked like a stone ring. When he woke up from the visualization of water, he was somewhat unwilling. He was just a little bit away. That stone ring should be pulled off, right? Could be pulled off? Was there something below? Rinpoche thought to himself. There was no record of this in the Rui visualization. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Rinpoche lay on the bed and waved his arms. On the third day, Rinpoche withdrew from the visualization of water, again with a trace of unwillingness on his face. I can definitely do it tomorrow. On the fourth day, Rinpoche withdrew from the visualization of water and lay on the bed. Damn it! On the fifth day, Rinpoche cursed. F***CK. There wasn't much progress over the past 5 days. Even Rinpoche had some doubts about whether his method was wrong. However, in the end, Rinpoche carefully thought about the re-visualization that he was practicing. This visualization of water, from the start, was to absorb the effects of medicine and change his body little by little. Besides increasing his strength, his stamina was much better than before. For example, even if he walked for a few hours, he would not feel tired at all. His daily visualization of water dive to the bottom of the lake was to put pressure on his body on the consciousness level. At the same time, it affected his external body and unearthed his body's potential. This was the process of his body absorbing the medicinal effects. From the beginning, the visualization of water had always been used for this purpose. Then, that Shirhuan definitely wasn't playing some puzzle-solving game with him. Instead, it was the same as before, trying to squeeze him dry so that he could unearth his body's potential. Now that he was at the bottom of the lake, what he needed to do was to pull up the stone chains. At the thought of this, Rinpoche made up his mind. If one day wasn't enough, then two. One day, he would be able to pull up that stone ring. After a few more days, Rinpoche returned from Earth and took another medicinal bath. He pulled the stone hoop again, and after using all his strength, he finally felt as if he could pull it up a little. This made him overjoyed. He knew that he had done the right thing. The stone slab under the stone ring was pulled up a little. There seemed to be a door there. Another day passed. On this day, Rinpoche was lying on his bed, practicing the visualization of water. His originally calm body suddenly trembled. 2 streams of heat flowed from his kidneys and began to circulate throughout his body. Wherever the 2 streams of heat flowed, his blood vessels and veins bulged. His muscles also bulged as if there was something swimming under his muscles. As the heat flowed through his body, Rinpoche's body heated up and turned red at the same time. It was as if he was having a high fever. His body temperature quickly rose to 40 degrees Celsius. However, all his sweat pores were tightly shut, and the heat could not be discharged along with his sweat. After a while, Rinpoche's head began to emit a steam-like gas, just like a large kettle. If this was seen by someone on Earth, they would probably think that they were witnessing the legendary 3 flowers at the crown and 5 cheese toward the origin. After a long time, the white gas on Rinpoche's head began to decrease, and his body temperature also dropped. At this moment, Rinpoche slowly woke up. He had just woken up, but he did not feel the feeling of breaking through a bottleneck or advancing in his cultivation. His whole body felt exhausted, thirsty, and tired. His mind was not very clear, and he only wanted to have a good sleep. He struggled to get up and drank 3 cups of water before falling into a deep sleep on the bed. Rinpoche was woken up by hunger. He could not see the exact time, but the sky was not bright yet. His stomach felt like it was on fire, and every cell in his body was screaming for hunger. He got up from the bed, ran out of the room at lightning speed, picked up a bamboo shoot that was prepared for Tian and Gun, and started to chew on it. The 2 little chaps were woken up by him. When they realized that he was secretly eating their bamboo shoots, they staggered forward and wanted to snatch it back. However, Rinpoche's eyes were glowing green. He even had the intention to roast these 2 chaps. When he saw them, he could smell the smell of meat. Sir Ren, the guards outside were alarmed by the noise inside. They came in to check and found Rinpoche squatting there. His eyes were glowing green, and he looked terrifying. "Quick, bring me to the imperial kitchen. I'm going to starve to death." Rinpoche had already finished his second bamboo shoot, but his stomach did not feel any better. He knew what he needed. Meat, a lot of meat. When they arrived at the imperial kitchen, Rinpoche did not see any leftovers. Regardless of whether it was vegetables or meat, they were all raw. He chewed on the fruits while getting someone to start the fire and stew the meat. After struggling for 3 hours, Rinpoche ate 2 pots of meat consecutively, which weighed about 15 to 20 kilograms, before the feeling of hunger finally subsided. Rinpoche leaned against the wall and sat on the ground. He really wanted to curse in his heart. The last time he encountered such a situation, it was the same for this breakthrough. The next time he broke through, he must prepare food first. At least, he had to prepare a few kilograms of braised beef. Otherwise, the feeling of hunger from head to toe wasn't something an ordinary person could endure. After resting, Rinpoche picked his teeth while strolling back to Pingle Park. The sky was already bright. At this moment, Rinpoche felt a little uncomfortable. It was as if his body was a lot more relaxed. His legs were light, and walking was almost like a moonwalk. When he returned to Pingle Park, he tried running 10 meters in an instant. His speed was much faster than before. If he needed around 13 seconds to run 100 meters previously, he only needed around 8 to 9 seconds now. However, he still felt as if he was not exerting his strength. The sudden change in his body made it difficult for him to control it. At the same time, the speed of his punches had increased a lot. This was especially true for his strength. When Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park and played with the stone dumbbell, his strength had increased by at least 50 kilograms. This meant that he now had more than 600 kilograms of strength. As for his jumping ability, this was the biggest improvement. He was able to jump up a 2-meter-tall wall with just 1 step. Rinpoche clenched his fists with a face full of joy. This breakthrough had actually improved his body so much. Following which, he asked the guards to help him test out other aspects of his abilities. He realized that his dynamic vision and reaction time were much faster than before. For example, when he was fighting with Tonglan previously, he couldn't see her movements clearly. Even if he could see them occasionally, his body couldn't react in time. After the test, Rinpoche was excited for the whole day. He had finally advanced to the man-will level,
and could be considered a practitioner. Furthermore, his strength had improved a lot. Even though his strength had only increased from 250 kilograms to 600 kilograms, the result of this increase of 100 kilograms was crushing. Needless to say, his speed had increased by 40%, his jumping ability had doubled, and his dynamic vision and reaction time had increased by 30%. If you're to compare his current strength with that of a day ago, Rinpoche felt that he could fight against 3 people effortlessly. A difference of 30% to 40% wasn't considered big, but in fact, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. If he were to fight with his previous self, he would be able to see the movements that he couldn't see clearly previously. He could now dodge the attacks that he couldn't dodge previously. On the other hand, Tonglan's perspective was the exact opposite. Rinpoche had an excited smile on his face all the way until he stood with Tonglan at the training ground in the afternoon. First, he played the background music for himself. Theme. As the majestic music sounded, it was as if the prologue of Smoky Battlefield had begun. Rinpoche's blood was boiling. After being beaten up by the little Lolita for so long, he could finally take revenge today. He could finally rise up. Even if he still wasn't her match, he wanted to give her a scare. Sir Tong. Rinpoche suddenly put away his previous expression and smiled at the person behind the little Lolita. Then, he lowered his body and rushed toward Tonglan like a leopard. His first move was a series of punches. The little Lolita was startled by his sudden increase in speed and was indeed caught unprepared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! Rinpoche flew out in an arc and landed heavily on the ground. Size such as life. Rinpoche lay on the ground, looked at the azure sky, and let out a faint sigh. Your strength has improved. The little Lolita was surprised. Rinpoche actually improved so much today compared to the day before yesterday. He actually improved from lying down after 2 moves to lying down after 4 moves, which was a full improvement. Rinpoche opened his mouth and blew a bubble. No matter what, he had already advanced from a level 2 rookie to a level 3 rookie. Furthermore, he discovered a problem during this exchange. His ability to withstand blows had also improved. Previously, when Tonglan's fists hit his body, it was still very painful. But now it was only slightly painful and much less painful than before. Tonglan controlled her strength very well and had always used the same amount of strength. In other words, his ability to withstand blows had also improved by a lot. Previously, he was seriously injured by the Empress's small fists and was on the verge of death. The current him should only be seriously injured. Chapter 285. Even though he was lectured by Tonglan again about why the flowers were so red, he was still delighted. After all, it was one's own strength. The feeling of being stronger than before and being filled with power still filled one with joy. To be honest, stepping into the man-wheel level was only the beginning. It had only been 6 months since he came to this world. To be able to reach this level was already enough to make him happy and a little proud. He was indeed a talent. In just over 6 months, he had already reached the man-wheel level without any foundation. After careful calculation, he realized that he had only been cultivating for 4 months at most. Only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could attain the man-wheel level. This was the difference between geniuses and mortals. Furthermore, if he reached the man-wheel level before Dayo's new year, it wouldn't be too embarrassing for him to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Rinpoche hummed a tune as he arrived at Yangshin Palace Hall. He then heard a cold snort and a voice full of murderous intent. He's courting death. Find out where he is. When Rinpoche entered Yangshin Palace Hall, he saw 2 tall and sturdy men wearing leather armor. The leather armor looked a little old, and there were traces of swords and knives on it. You guys can leave first. Find him, the Water Empress said coldly. Yes, Your Majesty. The 2 of them cupped their hands in greeting before turning around and leaving. However, their expressions were somewhat troubled. It would not be easy to find an expert like Lu Pinghai. If he was in Dayo, it would be easy to find him. However, the other party's main activity area was in Great Xia, and it was extremely difficult to find him. When they turned around, Rinpoche realized that they were twins. If he remembered correctly, they should be from the Protectorate of the North. He had seen them from afar in Ping City. After the two left, Rinpoche stepped forward and asked, "Your Majesty, why are you so angry?" "I'm looking for Lu Pinghai to exchange for something. I'll even let him ask for anything he wants. As long as it's not too much, I'll agree. However, he thinks too highly of himself and actually rejected me." The Empress was still angry. Rinpoche smiled bitterly. This seemed to be normal. However, this wasn't normal in the eyes of the Empress. The name Lu Pinghai sounded familiar. Rinpoche thought about it carefully and realized that he was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. He had done some homework these few days. "Is it very important?" Rinpoche probed. The Empress was so angry, and her target was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. Presumably, the item was very important. "You can say that," the Water Empress replied. The Spirit Yuan pill was of no use to her and was completely for Rinpoche. At that time, because Rinpoche's physical foundation was too weak, he could only cultivate Rui visualization. Therefore, she asked Hong Wu to send someone to look for Lu Pinghai to exchange for a Spirit Yuan pill that could supplement his physical foundation and increase his cultivation speed with the remaining medicinal power. However, Rinpoche actually smoothly reached the most important threshold of Rui visualization and attained the manual level within a few months. Furthermore, this Rui visualization did have some tricks up its sleeves. It was able to strengthen a person's foundation with such a poor foundation and allow him to enter the manual level steadily. It was just that the consumption was a little too high. However, whether the elixir was useful or not was one thing, and whether Lu Pinghai would give it to him or not was another matter. She was still quite angry at Lu Pinghai for rejecting her. This was her personality. She had given her conditions, and as long as it wasn't too much, she would agree to it. "If you refuse me, I will beat you to death." That Lu Pinghai really doesn't know how to appreciate favors. As long as we find him, throw a bottle of sarin gas at him and bring back the things he has on him. Rinpoche acted like an incompetent advisor. No matter which side he was on, he was definitely on the Empress's side. He just had to remember two things. First, the Empress was always right. Second, please refer to the first thing. The Empress felt very gratified after listening to his words. He relied on the fact that even if someone found him, he would be long gone by the time I arrived. No one else could keep up with his speed. Otherwise, I will meet him personally and see what else he has to say before he dies. The Empress was a little annoyed. Even though she had asked the two brothers to investigate, she knew that it wasn't very meaningful. Rinpoche thought for a while. Without satellites, it wasn't very realistic to use a tracking device. There was no other way. "He doesn't have a fixed place?" Rinpoche asked curiously. "His whereabouts have always been secretive. He only goes to a fishing village in the East Sea for a few days at the end of November every year." "That's hard to say. When he goes there again next year, we could just wait there." The Empress nodded her head slightly. Her current goal had already changed. Previously, her goal was to obtain the Spirit Yuan pill. Now, her goal was to kill Lu Pinghai. Since this was the case, there was no harm in letting him live for another year. "Do you have any candidates for the lantern-grabbing contest?" The Empress changed the topic and asked. She really wanted to see how Rinpoche would perform. "Can't we just choose a few young imperial guards from the palace?" Rinpoche asked in reply. "I'm afraid we can't find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace," the Empress said. There were very few new imperial guards in the palace. Most of them were left behind by the previous emperor. Over the years, there were very few replacements. Rinpoche was stunned and his eyes widened. He really didn't expect this problem. He actually couldn't even find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace. "Go and ask Xinja how many imperial guards are below the age of 25 in the palace." The Empress instructed someone behind her. Qing Yuan hurriedly left the hall. After a while, Qing Yuan returned and said to the Empress, "Your Majesty, there are 3
The Empress turned to Rinpoche and said, "You are still short of 6 people. Think of a way yourself." Rinpoche scratched his head. It was easy to find people because there were so many of them on the streets. However, he couldn't possibly find a few ordinary people to make up the numbers, right? It wouldn't look good on him. Even though he didn't want to win the championship, he couldn't be too embarrassing. It seemed like he had to look for reinforcements. Rinpoche pondered for a while. He was more familiar with the people in the Ministry of Works. It was better to seek help from that old man, Tong Jingye. He brought the Imperial Guards out of the palace and went straight to the Ministry of Works. Only then did he find out that the Ministry of Works didn't have much to do as it was nearing the end of the year. Tong Jingye had already returned home. Rinpoche hurriedly brought his men to the Tong residence. After explaining the purpose of his visit to the gatekeeper, he waited outside. After the time it took to burn 2 incense sticks, Rinpoche was finally brought in. Just a few steps into the door, he saw a little Lolita in white jumping out with a female guard following behind her. Good for nothing. Why are you here?" The little Lolita was very surprised. "In view of the inhumane things that you have done to me, I'm going to deduct the 3,000 taels of silver that I owe your family as compensation for your mental distress. Out of morality, I'm here to inform your grandfather." Rinpoche had a look of, "You are the main culprit" on his face. "It's fine if you call me good for nothing in the palace. Seeing that you are still a child, I won't lower myself to your level. You still dare to call me that outside? Where can I put my face? I specially asked my grandfather, and he said that you have given him the money you owe." The little Lolita raised her head and looked at him with disdain. "If he didn't give me the money, I still have to beat him up. Grandfather said that if you don't give me the money, I will beat you to death. I heard that you're going to learn from me in half a month. Heaven and earth are the basis of life. The ancestors are the basis of life. The ruler and the teacher are the basis of governance. Remember to respect your teacher." Rinpoche's face changed into a patient expression. Tonglan blinked her eyes and looked at him blankly. "What are you talking about?" "A teacher for a day, a father for life. Just remember this. I would like to have another son, but I'm afraid that Her Majesty won't agree." The voice of the old man, Tong Jingye, sounded faintly from the side. Rinpoche wanted to curse. Damn it. He had forgotten about this. Chapter 286. Rinpoche explained the purpose of his visit to Tong Jingye in the guest room. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, "I have a grandson who is 18 years old this year. His strength is pretty good." Rinpoche was originally prepared to borrow a few people with similar strength. He didn't expect Tong Jingye to actually have grandson, but he seems to have formed a team with a few friends. The second half of Tong Jingye's sentence made Rinpoche swallow the words that he was about to blurt out. "Why are you telling me this when you already have a team? Are you trying to show off that you have a grandson?" Rinpoche started to feel that it was a mistake to look for Tong Jingye. This old man wasn't reliable at all. "Why don't you bring Tonglan along?" Rinpoche almost choked. He was going to grab a lantern. What was the point of bringing a little loli along? "Look, she's still a bit stronger than you. At the very least, you can't beat her. She'll probably think that you're a burden, but with this old man's help, she'll still agree." Over the years, there have also been female teams that have participated in the lantern grabbing contest, Tong Jingye said as he spread his hands. Tong Jingye's words rendered Rinpoche speechless. He really wasn't a match for that little Lolita. "Lend me a few earth-will-level servants. The people from the Ministry of Works will do as well. As for Tonglan, forget about it. It won't be good if she gets hurt while snatching the lanterns," Rinpoche said. Tong Jingye looked at Rinpoche for a long time as if he was looking at a retard. Even Rinpoche felt uncomfortable. "Do you think young people with that level of strength are all cabbages? If he had that kind of strength at that age, he would have joined the army long ago. In the army, he would have been worth nurturing. How could he have become a servant?" Those who had such strength at this age were mostly the sons of the imperial court officials or the talented commoners in Lon City. Every year, the young people who perform outstandingly in the lantern grabbing competition, if they don't have a family background, are immediately recruited into the army or the public order bureau or the monitoring division. Rinpoche was slightly stunned. All the imperial guards in the palace were at the earthwheel level. He was used to seeing them and had forgotten about this point. However, he didn't know the second half of Tong Jingye's words. It turned out that the lantern-grabbing competition was also used to select talented young people. But thinking about it, this was indeed a good idea. Rinpoche suddenly thought of something and asked, "Do we have any examinations like the military selections?" "What is the military selection?" Tong Jingye asked curiously. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, "It's almost the same as the wushu examination in Great Xia." However, Deo didn't have such a combat examination. This was because in the 70 years since the founding of Deo, there had only been 3 emperors. The first was the founding emperor, Yapong. During his era, it could be said that there were experts everywhere in Deo. Any random person from the imperial court was not a weakling. In addition, the lifespans of the aboriginals were long to begin with, so they didn't need to replace the old with the new like in other countries. The imperial court already had its own people, so they didn't pay much attention to the selection of talents. However, that group of people had disappeared along with Yapong. According to Rinpoche, he was so engrossed in cultivation that his whereabouts were unknown. However, everyone knew that there was definitely something they didn't know. Perhaps only those who had reached Yapeng's level of strength would know. All these years, Hongwu's biggest wish was to find out why that group of people had left and where they had gone. According to his guess, it should be in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. The second emperor was the former emperor. He reigned for the longest time, 42 years. When he succeeded the throne, it was also when Deo was at its weakest. Almost all the experts of the older generation had left with Yapong. At that time, he had chosen some talents. Some of them were the descendants of the previous experts, such as Tong Jingye and Hongwu. Some of them were young experts that he had chosen from the villages in the 60,000 mountains and were now mainly in the protectorates. One of the more famous ones was Shi Wangu, the protector general of the south. He wasn't much weaker than Hongwu. However, Hongwu was already more than 60 years old this year, while Shi Wangu was only 40. It was believed that when Shi Wangu reached Hongwu's level of strength, he wouldn't be weaker than Hongwu. Shi Wangu's reputation in Deo was extremely great, especially among the remnant citizens of the Han nation in the south. After that, it was the Empress. After one of his trips, the former emperor returned with serious injuries. He entrusted his orphan to Hongwu and then disappeared. At present, the imperial court of Deo was still filled with the people left behind by the former emperor. Due to these various reasons, Deo didn't have a talent selection system like Great Xia did. Instead, it was a system similar to a recommendation system. In addition to these historical reasons, there was another important point, which was that most of the commoners weren't educated. The best way out was to advance step by step in places like the army. Although the children of the court officials weren't highly educated, they were at least literate. They were influenced by what they saw since young and were more knowledgeable. After passing certain examinations, they were sent to various departments. After chatting with Tong Jingye for a while, Rinpoche finally understood some of the current patterns in Deo. In the end, it was because Deo had only been founded for a short period of time. In addition, the lifespan of the Aboriginal experts was too long. For example, Hongwu, Shi Wangu, Tong Jingye, Qin Chuan, and the others could almost live to about 200 years old. There was no need to worry about the replacement of the old. As a result, no one realized the problem. It might take another few decades to 100 years for the hidden dangers to emerge. Rinpoche and Tong Jingye chatted for a while. Someone knocked on the door to inform him that it was lunchtime. Rinpoche then realized that it was already noon and hurried back to the palace. On this trip to the Tong residence, Rinpoche's team had 3 more people. They were the little girl, Tong Lan, and Tong Jingye's 2 nephews. There were 3 guards in the palace and 4 people, including himself. At present, there were only 3 people left. Rinpoche thought about it and thought of someone he knew. However, he didn't know how his situation was and whether he had a team now. It was Du Changkong, whom Ren Baqian met during the Great Hunt. He showed off his crossbow and ended up causing a lot of trouble. At that time, Ren Baqian was prepared to exchange items from Earth for martial arts manuals. In the end, he didn't use them and never saw him again. Even though Du Changkong was a useless teammate, Ren Baqian still had a good impression of him. The next day, Ren Baqian asked around and went to the Du residence. Ren Baqian was considered a well-known figure in Lan City. No matter where he went, as long as people saw the guards around him, they would immediately know who he was. He was the gigolo who brought a group of palace guards around to show off every day. There was no one else but him. Second young master went out just now. Deputy Prefect Run, why don't you wait in the residence for a while? I will go and look for him now. The burly man who was acting as the gatekeeper cupped his hands and said, No need, just tell me where he is. He might be drinking at Shanhui House at this time. The burly man said, Shanhui House, what a strange name. Do you know where it is? Ren Baqian turned his head and asked. It's on Jingyang Street. It's owned by the people of Shanhui Village. Usually, many descendants of the court officials go there, Su Wei said. Ren Baqian nodded. It's a gathering place for the descendants of the court officials. After a while, Ren Baqian appeared in front of a shop with his guards. This shop was inconspicuous and didn't have any signboards. There were only 2 square wooden signs at the door. One of them had the words wine, and the other had the words meat. This is rather interesting. Ren Baqian laughed and said to Su Wei, Go up and ask Du Changkong to come down. I won't be going up. That guy is actually here. Someone on the second floor of the restaurant looked down and exclaimed in surprise. Boo! Someone at the side craned his neck to take a look. Why is it him? Young Sparrowhawk, your opponent is here. Young Sparrowhawk has so many enemies. How would she know who it is? Someone at the side laughed. The others laughed as well. Lu Ruiyao directly picked up the wine jar and smashed it over. The man pushed the bottom of the jar with his empty hand, and the force that was flying horizontally was suddenly turned upwards by him. Then, he caught the falling jar and smiled. Treating me to a drink? I won't stand on ceremony then. Whenever she mentions it, she grits her teeth, but she can't do anything about it. The young man who was looking out of the window earlier turned his head and said. This time, more than 10 people immediately quietened down. Once this was said, everyone knew who it was. These days, they had been talking about him a lot. Soon after, everyone had a question. What is he doing here? Is Du Changkong around? Su Wei went up to the second floor and asked. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to a mature-looking man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Me? Du Changkong pointed at himself with his finger. He was a little surprised as he didn't expect Du Changkong to be looking for him. After such a long time, he thought that Du Changkong had already forgotten about him. Chapter 287. Du Changkong did not know why Ren Baqian was looking for him. With this thought in mind, he went downstairs and saw Ren Baqian standing there with a circle of guards surrounding him. Compared to when they first met, Ren Baqian was indeed a lot darker, but he was also a lot more well-dressed. The most important change was that he was full of vigor. Back then, Ren Baqian was still somewhat listless and less courageous. He gave off a much more reserved vibe. Now, with the changes in his status, strength, and outlook, he was no longer the same as he was in the past. Deputy Prefect Run. Du Changkong cupped his hands. Brother Du. Ren Baqian carefully sized up Du Changkong. He looked mature and mature. Although he was 17 or 18 years old, he looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. He gave off the impression that he was a steady and reliable person. However, after dealing with Du Changkong once, he knew that this was just a facade. Du Changkong was a fraud and a typical pig-like teammate. But who asked him to be short of manpower now? I haven't seen you for a long time. Previously, I said that I would look for Brother Du after I came back. In the end, one thing led to another, and I haven't been able to get away. Ren Baqian hooked his arm around Du Changkong's shoulder. However, Du Changkong was taller than him by a head and had a strong physique. This made Ren Baqian rather uncomfortable
and he put his arm down. It's good that Deputy Prefect remembers me. Du Changkong grinned. Why is Deputy Prefect Du looking for me? Du Changkong hesitated for a while before asking. With Rinpoche's current status, he was definitely not here to reminisce about the past. You know about the lantern-grabbing contest during the new year, right? Do you have a team? I'm still short of one person, so I immediately thought of you. After all, we are acquaintances, and I'm confident in your abilities. Rinpoche patted him on the shoulder. My brother and I formed a team. We have 4 people. Du Changkong felt a little awkward. In fact, he was well aware of Rinpoche's strength. He could tell at a glance. However, he didn't really care about winning or losing. Friendship came first, competition came second, and participation was the most important. Furthermore, everyone knew that the Empress thought highly of Rinpoche. Since they had interacted with each other before, it would be a good thing to use this opportunity to build a good relationship with him. Even though the Aboriginals were known to be straightforward, they were still capable of such calculations. How's his strength? Rinpoche asked. Slightly worse than me, Du Changkong said after thinking for a while. That's easy. All 4 of you come in. It's settled then. Rinpoche laughed heartily. This was a good thing, for people could come in directly, and one of the palace guards could be removed later. Otherwise, if the weakest one was eliminated based on strength, it would be him without a doubt. Other than himself or the palace guards, excluding the Tong clan, Du Changkong and the rest, it would not be good. How should we divide the work? Du Changkong asked. The lantern-grabbing team was usually made up of 10 people, and there were all kinds of roles. For example, the one in charge of opening the way was called Tooth Gate. The one in charge of snatching the lanterns was called Lantern Head, and the one in charge of preventing others from interfering with their own team and interfering with other teams was called Broom Pole. Of course, this was only a rough division. In reality, it was possible that the lamp holder had been killed, and Fong Min or Broom had come forward to snatch the lamp. Just like on a football field, a goalkeeper could also run into the opponent's penalty area to shoot. Let's meet the day after tomorrow, Rinpoche said. Who else is there besides us? Du Changkong asked. Do you know Tong Lan? The granddaughter of the Minister of Works, Sir Tong. When Rinpoche mentioned this name, Du Changkong's expression immediately became weird. It was as if he had a toothache or constipation. Why don't I introduce a few people to you? Du Changkong's face twitched, and he seemed to want to retreat. Why? Rinpoche became curious. Du Changkong had such an expression when he heard Tong Lan's name. Was Tong Lan so powerful? That lass's mouth is too smelly. Furthermore, she is so young, and it would be a joke to be in a team with her. Rinpoche agreed with the first sentence. That lass's mouth was indeed smelly. Rinpoche patted Du Changkong's shoulder and said, It doesn't matter if her mouth is smelly or if she is young, but you have to take a long-term view. With your current mentality, you deserve to be single. Du Changkong was dumbfounded. What was Deputy Prefect Rin talking about? It's decided. Let's do it the day after tomorrow morning. The location will be at the training field beside the palace. Rinpoche decided on this matter. Without waiting for Du Changkong to speak, he immediately got on the 4-corned cow and brought everyone back to the palace. Du Changkong rubbed his head. Other things were fine, but that last Tong Lan was really too annoying. When they went upstairs, a few people looked at them and asked, You have dealings with that person. I borrowed a crossbow from him in the past. She knows about it. Du Changkong pointed at Sparrowhawk. Her face immediately turned black. He was touching a sore spot. Because of that crossbow, she was reprimanded by Rinpoche, lost face in front of the Empress, and was eventually punished. On the other hand, that person had a meteoric rise. He was even chosen as the Empress's husband. Du Changkong's words were simply a slap to her face. Why did he look for you? Someone asked curiously. Lantern grabbing. Du Changkong sat at the side of the table and said in a muffled voice, He wants to participate in the lantern grabbing. Everyone was surprised. That person's strength was similar to that of an ant to them. He could be killed with a light punch. Yet, he actually wanted to participate in the lantern grabbing. Was he going to participate in the lantern grabbing or blackmail? Who would dare to touch him? He would probably be sent flying if he was squeezed. Du Changkong nodded his head and did not mention that Rinpoche's strength had improved tremendously. His strength was equivalent to that of a man-wheel expert in Great Xia. To everyone, he was still very weak. You agreed? Someone asked. I agreed. Du Changkong spread out his hands. Oomph. A cold snort was heard. Without looking, everyone knew it was Lu Royale. I'm afraid that you won't even be able to get close to him. Lu Royale sneered. That's none of your business. Du Changkong wasn't a kind person. He was only afraid of Hong Xian. He didn't really care about Lu Royale. Lu Royale was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She was prepared to look for Hong Xian in a while. Originally, Hong Xian said that she wouldn't participate this year. However, since that person dared to participate, Hong Xian might be interested. She wouldn't be able to touch him during normal times. However, since he dared to participate in the lantern grabbing contest, he couldn't be blamed if he got seriously injured with just a light touch. In fact, she wasn't the only one who had this thought. After all, the Empress was the idol of many people in Dayo. Rinpoche was still hated by many people. When they heard this news, several of them wondered if they would accidentally lightly touch him when the time came. Even though the others had this thought in their minds, they didn't show it. 2 days later, Rinpoche left the palace early in the morning and went straight to the training field. At this time, it was time to change shifts and there weren't many people there. When he arrived, Du Changkong was already there with 3 other people beside him. 4 of them were squatting by the wall, eating a super large burrito in their hands. Deputy Prefect Run. Du Changkong stood up and greeted Rinpoche when he saw him. Brother Du. Rinpoche got off his 4-corn cow and sized up the other 3 people. They looked a little like Du Changkong, but they weren't as old as Du Changkong. Those who didn't know would think that it was a father bringing his 3 sons out. Du Changyue, Du Changqing, and Du Changjiang are all my brothers. Deputy Prefect Run, call me by my name. Otherwise, I'll feel awkward. Du Changkong introduced them in a low and muffled voice. Nice to meet you. Rinpoche cupped his fists. The few of them quickly returned the greeting and sized up this legendary figure curiously. That girl isn't here yet. Rinpoche turned his head to look. The few of them waited for more than an hour before they finally saw the few of them. Tong Lan was standing on the back of a 4-corn cow. When she got closer, she flipped over and jumped down. She stretched out her finger and pointed at Rinpoche. With a face full of displeasure, she said, You are such a good-for-nothing, yet you still dare to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest? You even persuaded Grandpa to let me team up with you. I might as well watch the show while eating fruits at the side since I can't win anyway. And these few, even though they are slightly better than you, they are still good-for-nothings. If I team up with all of you, others will easily think that I'm the same kind of trash as you. I'm still so young. How am I going to face others in the future? Tong Lan pointed at Rinpoche, the Du brothers, and the 2 young men who were smiling bitterly behind her. Can you beat her? Rinpoche turned his head and asked Du Changkong. Du Changkong looked like he was in pain, but he couldn't flare up. In the end, he shook his head sullenly. If Rinpoche hadn't been staring at him, he wouldn't have noticed it. Rinpoche widened his eyes. Du Changkong actually couldn't beat this girl? I still thought that she was only slightly more talented than ordinary children. In addition, she had been nurtured since young, so her martial arts were slightly better than ordinary children. That was why the Empress allowed her to be his sparring partner. It turned out that she wasn't a little girl, but a demoness. He had actually been tricked by the Empress for so long. To think that he had always felt that he couldn't even beat a 10-year-old child. It turned out that he wasn't alone. Chapter 288. Early in the morning, a group of people were scolded by a little lowly, but they couldn't refute her. Their faces were twitching, and their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. Only Rinpoche was in a good mood and was almost humming a tune. Anyway, I'm not alone. Although you guys are a bunch of trash, since Grandpa has spoken, I will reluctantly bring you guys to participate in this lantern-grabbing contest. Just don't drag me down. After thinking for a while,
she sighed and said with an aggrieved face. It's impossible for a bunch of good-for-nothings like you to not hold me back. This is my first time participating in a lantern-grabbing contest, and I've already been ruined by you. Friendship comes first, competition comes second. The most important thing is to participate, Rinpoche added. The four Du brothers nodded in unison, like chicks pecking at grains. Tong Lan squinted at him and said, That's how a loser comforts himself. If we can get first place, why should we get second place? Rinpoche lowered his head, looked at Tong Lan, sighed slightly, and said, Until now, you still don't know the true meaning of lantern grabbing. Do you think so many people are grabbing lanterns just to decide the champion? Tong Lan looked up with a look of disdain. Don't tell me you're going there to make friends. Not entirely, but you're still too young to understand the meaning behind it. I understand very well. Rinpoche continued to speak with a doting expression on his face. Tong Lan really wanted to give him a kick. Everyone looked at Rinpoche to see what he had to say. The purpose of this lantern-grabbing activity is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports without any discrimination and with the lantern-grabbing spirit, to promote mutual understanding in the spirit of excellence, unity, and fair competition. Thus, to contribute to a peaceful and better world. It could be summarized as peace, friendship, and progress. Du Changkong, everyone was shocked. They never thought that a lantern-grabbing contest could have such a profound meaning. Rinpoche waved his arms. Our slogan is higher, faster, stronger. Sir Rin is still the one who sees things clearly. Peace, friendship, and progress are the objectives of our participation in the lantern-grabbing contest. Higher, faster, and stronger are our watchwords. Du Changkong immediately applauded. Everyone was stunned. Are we talking about the same thing as the two of you? Why did he feel that something was not quite right? Rinpoche didn't care whether they believed him or not. In any case, he had to say it this way. In a while, he would discuss with Her Majesty about pasting this motto and slogan all over Lan City. All right, since everyone is here, let's talk about the arrangements. Tong Lan will be the lantern head to snatch the lantern. I will be the tooth door to open the path. And the two from the Tong family, Sulu and Jiang, will be the broom on the left and right to protect Tong Lan. Du Changkong and the rest of you will be the roaming sentries to prevent the enemy's roaming sentries from approaching and provide support to the broom, Rinpoche said as he clapped his hands. Sulu and Jiang, who were the two guards in the palace. This was a relatively common arrangement. However, the lantern-grabbing competition was not a football competition. Most of the time, there would be a chaotic battle towards the end. There were only two key players. One was Toothgate, who was in charge of clearing the path for the lantern grabbers. If Toothgate was blocked, the entire team would be hindered. The other was the lamp holder. The lamp holder was placed under the shelf. The main thing to look at was the lamp holder. It was not allowed for the lamp holder to pass through the Toothgate and go to the lamp stand alone. One must have the Toothgate or two brooms by their side, otherwise they would be eliminated. Just like on a battlefield, a general couldn't just abandon his army and charge into the enemy's formation alone, right? The rules of the lantern-grabbing competition were also the most basic way to cultivate teamwork and combat habits. As a result, it was often held in the army. It wasn't only held during the new year, but it wasn't usually so grand. In Dayo, the lantern-grabbing competition was equivalent to modern football. The lamp holder was generally the strongest in the team, followed by the Toothgate. Everyone didn't have any objections to Tong Lan being the lamp holder, but Rinpoche being the Toothgate shocked everyone. You're going to be the Toothgate? Tong Lan widened her eyes in disbelief. Do you want me to carry you, a burden, to the lampstand? Rinpoche waved his hand and said, Don't look down on me. I have already made arrangements. When the time comes, I won't be a burden. No one can stop me. Do you believe this? Tong Lan widened her eyes and questioned him. I can't use weapons, but I can wear armor, right? Rinpoche retorted. Even if you wrap yourself up like a turtle, will it be of any use? I will let all of you see what it means to be unstoppable. Rinpoche looked very confident. Although the Aboriginals were very powerful, and those who participated in the lantern-grabbing competition weren't mediocre. However, even a tiger wouldn't be able to swallow a hedgehog. Everyone stared at him, wanting to know where this mysterious confidence of his came from. Tong Lan puffed up her bun face and said dejectedly, "It's over. I can't even get close to the lampstand in my first lantern-grabbing competition. It's so embarrassing. If people bring this up in the future, it will be a dark history. Tomorrow, I will get a cloth to cover my face." She learned the term dark history from Rinpoche. Rinpoche looked at her bun face and wanted to pinch it, but he didn't dare to. He reckoned that he would have to participate in the lantern-grabbing competition with a caste. "Today is just a meeting. Don't worry too much. Even if we can't win, I won't blame you. Like I said before, friendship comes first, competition comes second. Our goal is to go higher, faster, and stronger." Everyone continued to look at him. "It's because of you that we can't win. Otherwise, there might be a little bit of hope. With you around, that little bit of hope is gone. Next, let's meet here at noon on the first day of the Lunar New Year and participate in a lantern-grabbing competition together," Rinpoche said to them. Everyone nodded except for Tong Lan, who was still grumbling unhappily like a chatterbox. However, Rinpoche ignored her. The lantern-grabbing competition usually started at around 7 o'clock in the evening. Usually, people would arrive at around 5 o'clock in advance to participate. Rinpoche arrived 4 hours earlier because he wanted to discuss it again. Even if it was a last-minute preparation, it would still be beneficial. "Everyone, see you in 5 days." Rinpoche cupped his hands at everyone and left on his fork-horned cow with the guards. Tong Lan looked at Rinpoche leaving and snorted. In a flash, she landed on the back of the fork-horned cow. Without waiting for the other two people, she rode the fork-horned cow back. After everyone left, Du Chongqing said, "It doesn't seem very reliable." "It doesn't matter. In any case, we didn't expect to win," Du Chongqing said. Everyone nodded their heads. During the lantern-grabbing competition, there were indeed many capable people. A few outstanding people from the younger generation would participate. After all, this was also an opportunity to showcase the strength of the next generation. Compared to those people, the few of them were indeed not enough. The next day, notices were pasted all over Lawn City. Many people surrounded them curiously, waiting for someone to explain what was written on them. The person in the middle had a strange expression on his face as he said, "This notice says that this year's lantern-grabbing event is to educate the Aboriginal youth through sports that are free of any discrimination and have the lantern-grabbing spirit. The spirit of excellence, unity, fair competition, and mutual understanding. Thus, they will contribute to a peaceful and better world. In short, peace, friendship, and progress. Not only this year, but this will also be the purpose of future lantern-grabbing competitions." Towards the end, his voice was almost like the buzzing of a mosquito. When he said the first few sentences, the entire place became dead silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. What was he saying? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.